Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Darkwater, and I've been cleaning up after coal companies for 18 years. I've seen what they do to the land, the water, the people. I've crawled through toxic waste sites and breathed air so thick with chemicals it burns your throat. But I always believed there was a scientific reason for everything. Gas leaks, structural problems, equipment failures. That's what I told myself explained all the ghost stories. The miners around Black Rock Hollow loved their ghost stories. They'd sit in the local diner, coffee cups shaking in their hands, talking about the ghost miners they saw down in the old shafts, dead men still swinging pickaxes 50 years later. I'd shake my head and explain about methane gas, how it makes you see things that aren't there, how guilt over mining accidents can mess with your mind. I should have listened to them. January 1975 was brutal cold in West Virginia, the kind of winter that freezes your breath before it leaves your mouth. I was driving my EPA truck up the mountain road to Black Rock Hollow when the call came through on my radio. 3-person environmental survey team had gone missing in the abandoned mine complex. Their truck was found at the entrance, doors open, equipment scattered in the snow. "Sam, we need you up there," Lisa Whitehawk's voice crackled through the static. Lisa was my EPA contact, one of the few people in government who actually cared about holding these coal companies responsible. Something's not right about this site. I'd known something wasn't right about Black Rock Hollow for months. Our water tests kept showing impossible toxin levels in the streams below the old mine, heavy metals that shouldn't exist in those concentrations, chemical signatures that made no sense. The mining company, Blackstone Coal, insisted they'd followed all safety protocols when they sealed the mine in 1960. Their paperwork was perfect. Too perfect. The snow started falling harder as I reached the mine entrance. My truck's headlights cut through the white curtain, illuminating the rusted warning signs. Danger, unstable structure, toxic gases, keep out. Beyond the chain-link fence, the black mouth of the mine shaft gaped like a wound in the mountainside. I'd been in plenty of abandoned mines before. They all felt the same. Cold, empty, dead. But Black Rock Hollow felt different. Even sitting in my warm truck, I could feel something wrong seeping through the metal and glass. The air itself felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I grabbed my gear bag and started hiking toward the entrance. My boots crunched through snow that was already 6 inches deep. The missing team's footprints were still visible, leading straight into the mine. But there were other tracks too. Older boot prints that looked wrong somehow. Too deep, too narrow, like they were made by men wearing mining boots from 50 years ago. My flashlight beam swept across the mine entrance. The steel supports were rusted and bent, but still holding. Ice hung from the ceiling like teeth. And there, arranged in a neat circle just inside the entrance, was all the missing team's equipment. Gas detectors, sample containers, GPS units, even their lunch coolers, arranged like someone had set up a memorial. But no bodies. I keyed my radio. "Lisa, I'm at the site. Found their equipment, but no sign of the team. Any indication what happened?" I studied the scene, my breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Looks like they just left everything and walked deeper into the mine. That doesn't make sense. Protocol says never leave your safety equipment." She was right. Environmental teams don't just abandon their gear and wander into unstable mines, especially not in January. Especially not when the gas readings ISIS in this area had been going crazy for months. I clipped my own gas detector to my belt and checked my emergency beacon. 27 miles from the nearest town, and now the snow was coming. Down so hard I could barely see 10 feet. If something went wrong, help wasn't coming fast. But 3 people were missing, and I was the only one qualified to go after them safely. I shouldered my pack and stepped into the mine. The temperature dropped 10 degrees immediately. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness ahead. And somewhere in the distance, impossibly, I could hear the sound of metal striking stone, like someone was still mining. The sound of pickaxes shouldn't exist in an abandoned mine. I told myself it was water dripping, or settling timbers, or wind through the shafts. But the rhythm was too steady, too purposeful. Clink, 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 echoing from somewhere deep in the mountain. I followed the main tunnel, checking my gas detector every few steps. Carbon monoxide levels were normal. Methane was barely registering. Whatever was making those sounds, it wasn't dangerous gas buildup. The missing team's footprints continued ahead of me, 3 sets of boots in the mine dust. But the older tracks were getting clearer too. Not just 1 or 2 sets, dozens of them, all heading deeper underground, like a whole crew had walked this path. The weird thing was, these old tracks looked fresh. Sharp edges, clear heel prints, like they'd been made yesterday instead of 50 years ago. My radio crackled. "Sam? You copy?" "I'm here, Lisa, following tracks about 200 yards into the main shaft. Be careful. I've been researching this mine's history. Black Rock Hollow had a major explosion in 1924. 47 men died." I stopped walking. Company records showed it was a methane buildup accident. That's what they claimed. But I found some old union documents. The miners had been complaining about safety violations for months. Company management ignored the warnings. When the explosion happened, they bribed the investigators to blame it on unforeseeable circumstances. 47 dead miners, all because some executives cared more about profits than lives. I'd seen it 100 times in 100 different ways. Coal companies cutting corners, covering up problems, sacrificing workers to save money. The pickaxe sounds stopped suddenly. The silence was worse than the noise. I moved forward more carefully, playing my flashlight beam across the tunnel walls. The rock was black coal, shot through with veins of silver that glittered in the light. Support timbers groaned overhead, sagging under decades of pressure. And there, carved into one of the wooden posts, were initials, JM 1924, and below that, TR 1924, and SL 1924. The dead miners. They'd carved their initials while they worked, never knowing they only had days to live. My gas detector started beeping. Not an alarm, just a reading change. I looked down at the display and felt ice form in my stomach. The carbon monoxide level was spiking, but not in the way gas normally moves through a mine. It was increasing and decreasing in a pattern, like breathing. "Sam?" Lisa's voice was faint through the radio static. "Your beacon signal is getting weak." I keyed the microphone. "Still here. Found some carved initials from 1924. Gas readings are acting strange." No response. Just static. I was alone in the dark with 47 ghosts and 3 missing people. The tunnel split ahead into 3 branches. The missing team's tracks continued straight, but my flashlight caught something in the left passage. A glow, faint and blue, like electrical equipment. I moved toward it carefully. What I found made my hands start shaking. It was one of the missing team members. Dave Martinez, according to his ID badge. He was sitting against the tunnel wall, eyes closed, breathing steady. Alive, but somehow empty. Like nobody was home behind his eyes. "Dave!" I shook his sets. "Holder." "Dave, can you hear me?" His eyes opened and focused on me slowly. When he spoke, his voice sounded wrong, too deep, too old. "They're still down there," he said, "still working. Still trying to dig their way out." "Dave, it's Sam Darkwater, EPA. Where are the others?" "They went to find them, to help them." His eyes weren't seeing me anymore. They were looking through me at something 50 years in the past. The company knew. They knew the gas was building up. They knew the supports were failing, but they kept us working because the quarterly profits mattered more than our lives. This wasn't Dave talking. Dave was 26 years old and from California. He wouldn't know about 1924 mining practices or quarterly profit reports. "Dave, I need you to focus. Where did Jennifer and Mike go?" His hand pointed deeper into the mine, toward a passage marked with a rusted sign. "Authorized personnel only. Danger." They went to warn them, he whispered. But you can't warn dead men. My gas detector started screaming. Carbon monoxide levels were spiking toward lethal, but the readings were impossible. The gas was moving in waves like it was being pushed by something, and underneath the alarm I could hear the pickaxe sounds again, closer now, coming from the passage Dave had pointed toward. I grabbed Dave under the arms and started dragging him toward the mine entrance. He was dead weight, muttering about cave-ins and company executives and men who died for someone else's greed. My detector kept shrieking warnings, but the gas levels kept shifting in patterns that made no scientific sense. When we reached the main tunnel, I looked back toward the authorized personnel passage. The blue glow was stronger now, and I could see shapes moving in it. Human shapes, but wrong somehow. Too thin, too tall, wearing clothes that looked decades out of date. One of them turned toward me, and I saw a face pale as moonlight under a mining helmet that cast no shadow. He raised his pickaxe and pointed it at the passage Dave had indicated. They wanted me to go deeper. I keyed my radio, hoping for any signal. Lisa, if you can hear me, I found Dave Martinez. He's alive, but in some kind of shock. The other two went into a restricted area. I'm going after them. Static. I was on my own. I left Dave by the mine entrance with my emergency beacon and a heat pack. He'd be safer there than anywhere else in these tunnels. Then I shouldered my gear and headed back into the darkness, toward the passage marked Danger. The ghost miners were waiting. The danger passage sloped downward at a sharp angle. My boots struggled for grip on the icy stone as I descended into the mountain's belly. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with moisture and something else, a metallic taste that reminded me of blood. My flashlight illuminated support beams that were different from the main tunnel. These were newer, installed sometime in the 1960s when Blackstone coal sealed the mine. But they were already failing. Wood rot and metal corrosion that should have taken decades had happened in just 15 years. Like something down here was eating away at everything designed to keep the mountain from falling. The pickaxe sounds were constant now, not rhythmic anymore, but frantic, desperate, like men trying to dig their way out of a cave-in that happened 50 years ago. I found Jennifer's equipment first. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the team leader, had left her sample cases arranged in another neat circle, just like at the mine entrance. But this time, the arrangement was different. The cases formed a pattern I recognized from my mining safety training, the layout workers used to mark dangerous gas pockets. They were warning me. My gas detector was going insane. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, methane, all spiking and dropping in waves that defied physics. It was like the mountain itself was breathing poison. Then I heard Jennifer's voice, echoing from deeper in the passage. Mike, don't go in there. I ran toward the sound, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the tunnel walls. The passage opened into a large chamber carved out of solid coal. My light swept across the space and I saw them, Jennifer and Mike Kowalski, standing at the far end of the chamber, staring at something I couldn't see. Jennifer, Mike, I called out. EPA, I'm here to get you out. They turned toward me, and I saw the same empty expression Dave had worn, but worse. Jennifer's eyes were completely white, rolled back in her head. Mike's mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. They showed us, Jennifer said in a voice that wasn't hers, a man's voice, rough from years of coal dust. Showed us what really happened down here, what the company did. The chamber filled with blue light, and I saw them. 47 men in mining clothes from 1924, their faces black with coal dust, their eyes burning like stars. They stood between me and the EPA team, not threatening, but blocking my path. One stepped forward. He was young, maybe 25, with a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't gray as stone. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once. Samuel Darkwater, we know who you are. We know what you do. I forced my voice to stay steady. I clean up environmental damage. I make companies accountable for what they've done. Then you understand why we're still here. The ghost miner gestured to the chamber walls. My flashlight beam followed his movement, and I saw something that made my blood freeze. The walls weren't natural coal seams. They were lined with metal drums, industrial waste containers, hundreds of them, stacked from floor to ceiling. Blackstone Coal didn't just mine this mountain, the ghost continued. When they sealed the mine in 1960, they turned it into a toxic waste dump. Chemical weapons from the war, industrial solvents, radioactive material from weapons plants. They buried it all down here and told the government the mine was empty. I understood now why the water tests had B's, and showing impossible contamination levels. The drums were leaking, had been leaking for 15 years, poisoning groundwater for miles around. The EPA team found the truth, another ghost said. This one was older, with a white beard stained brown from tobacco. But they breathed too much of the poison. It's in their blood now, in their brains. I looked at Jennifer and Mike. They were standing perfectly still, but I could see their chests rising and falling too fast, hyperventilating. Their skin had a gray tinge I'd seen before in workers exposed to severe chemical contamination. How long do they have? Hours, maybe less. The gases are eating them from inside. My mind raced through possibilities. Chemical exposure protocols, emergency medical procedures, evacuation routes. But we were miles underground, in unstable tunnels, during a blizzard. Even if I could get them to the surface, the nearest hospital was 3 hours away in good weather. There has to be something I can do. The young ghost miner smiled, and it was the saddest expression I'd ever seen. You can do what we couldn't. You can make them pay. The chamber filled with images, not hallucinations, but memories projected directly into my mind. I saw the 1924 mine explosion through the eyes of men who died in it, felt their terror as gas levels spiked and company supervisors ordered them to keep working, experienced their final moments as the mountain collapsed around them. But I also saw what came after. Blackstone Coal executives in expensive suits, bribing investigators, falsifying safety reports, covering up evidence. And then, decades later, the same executives making deals to dump toxic waste in the empty mine shafts. The waste will kill thousands, the bearded ghost said. It's already in the water table. In 20 years, everyone downstream will have cancer, birth defects, death. Unless so, Mion stops it, I whispered. Unless someone with authority and credibility exposes the truth. Jennifer screamed suddenly, a sound of pure agony. She collapsed to her knees, blood trickling from her nose. Mike followed a second later, convulsing as the chemical poisoning reached critical levels. "Help them!" I shouted at the ghosts. "If you have power here, use it to help them." "We can slow the poison," the young miner said. "Buy them time, but only if you promise to finish what we started. Make Blackstone Coal pay for what they did to us, what they're doing to everyone downstream." I didn't hesitate. "I promise." The 47 ghosts raised their hands, and the air in the chamber changed. The toxic gases swirled away from Jennifer and Mike, drawn into the coal walls like the mountain was breathing them in. The EPA team's convulsions stopped. Their breathing steadied. But the effort was costing the ghosts. They were becoming fainter, more transparent. "We don't have long," the bearded miner said, his voice already distant. "The poison is too strong. It's been building for 50 years. The tunnel behind me groaned ominously. Dust rained from the ceiling. The mountain was becoming unstable, like the ghost's presence was the only thing holding it together. "How do I get us out?" "There's an old emergency shaft 50 yards north, but Samuel Darkwater—" The young ghost was barely visible now. "Remember your promise. The living deserve better than we got." The chamber plunged into darkness as the ghosts faded away. My flashlight was the only illumination, and it showed Jennifer and Mike struggling to their feet, their eyes clear for the first time since I'd found them. "Sam?" Jennifer's voice was weak but human again. "What happened? Where are we?" "Toxic waste dump," I said, helping them both stand. We need to get out now. Can you walk?" They nodded, though both were shaky on their feet. I gave them my spare flashlights and started leading them toward the north wall, looking for the emergency shaft the ghosts had mentioned. Behind us, the tunnels we'd entered through collapsed with a sound like thunder. We had one way out, and the mountain was falling down around us. The emergency shaft was a vertical tunnel cut through solid rock, with rusted iron rungs hammered into the walls every few feet. It climbed up into darkness so deep my flashlight couldn't find the top. Ice covered every metal surface, making the climb treacherous. "How far up?" Mike asked, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "No idea," I said, testing the first rung. The metal groaned but held. "But it's the only way out." Jennifer went first, then Mike, with me bringing up the rear. My pack contained all our environmental samples, evidence of the toxic waste dump that the ghosts had shown us, evidence that could shut down Blackstone coal and save thousands of lives, if we lived to deliver it. 20 feet up, Jennifer's flashlight illuminated something carved into the rock. Names and dates, just like in the main tunnel. But these were different, more recent. "B. Stevens, 1960, she read aloud. "Last day. They're sealing us in." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" "T. Morrison, 1960. They paid us to keep quiet about the drums. God forgive us." More names, more dates. All from 1960. All from workers who'd helped Blackstone Coal turn the abandoned mine into a toxic waste repository. Workers who'd been sealed inside to keep their silence permanent. We weren't the first people to try to escape through this shaft. We were just the first ones the ghosts had helped. 50 feet up, Mike's flashlight failed. The batteries had been drained by the supernatural cold in the waste chamber. Jennifer and I shared our lights, but the climb was getting harder. The rungs were spaced further apart here, forcing us to stretch for handholds. Ice made every grip uncertain. "There," Jennifer gasped, pointing upward. "I see light." Natural light, gray and dim, filtering down from the surface. We were close. But as we climbed toward it, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices from above. Human voices, talking in low, urgent tones. "Found." The EPA truck at the main entrance. "Witnesses saw them go into the mine. Winter storm will cover our tracks." Blackstone Coal Security. They'd found our vehicles and followed us up the mountain. Now they were waiting at the surface, ready to make sure we never reported what we'd discovered underground. I keyed my radio, hoping Lisa could hear me. "Whitehawk, if you copy, we're in the emergency shaft at Black Rock Hollow. Blackstone Security is topside. We need backup." Static. The storm was too heavy for radio signals. We climbed in silence, moving as quietly as possible on the icy rungs. The voices above got clearer as we approached the surface. "Boss wants this contained," one man said. "EPA team never made it out of the mine. Tragic accident." "What about their backup?" "Weather'll keep anyone else away for days. By then, we'll have the whole site secured." I counted at least 4 distinct voices. Armed corporate security against 3 exhausted, half-poisoned environmental scientists. Not good odds. The shaft ended at a concrete cap with a heavy metal grate. Through the openings, I could see boots and legs of the security team. They were positioned around the shaft entrance, smoking cigarettes and talking casually about covering up our murders. "Sam," Jennifer whispered so quietly I could barely hear her. "My sample kit. It has an emergency flare." I nodded, understanding. 1 flare against 4 armed men wasn't much, but it might create enough chaos for us to escape into the forest. I climbed past them to just below the grate, pulled the emergency flare from Jennifer's kit, and waited. The security team was relaxed, confident. They thought we were still trapped underground, slowly dying from chemical exposure. They were about to learn different. I yanked the flare's ignition cord. Red light exploded through the shaft, blinding, brilliant after hours in darkness. As the security team shouted in surprise and alarm, I used their confusion to heave the metal grate aside and roll out onto the frozen ground. "Run!" I screamed to Jennifer and Mike. "Head for the tree line!" The forest was 50 yards away across open ground covered in knee-deep snow. Security team members were already recovering from the flare's surprise, reaching for weapons. But they'd made a mistake. They'd positioned themselves around the shaft, not in a formation to control the surrounding area. We ran through the snow like our lives depended on it, because they did. Gunshots cracked behind us, but the men were firing blind into the darkness. The flare had ruined their night vision just as much as it had illuminated our escape route. 20 yards. 30. I could hear them organizing behind us, spreading out to cut off our escape routes. But the storm was our ally now, wind and snow that made accurate shooting impossible. We reached the trees as flashlight beams started sweeping the area behind us. The forest was dense pine and oak, perfect for hiding but treacherous for running in darkness. Branches grabbed at our clothes, roots caught our feet, but we kept moving deeper into the woods. "This way," Jennifer called softly. She'd found a deer trail winding down the mountainside toward the main road. We could follow it and hope to reach help before the security team tracked us down. But as we stumbled through the forest, I realized we had a bigger problem than armed corporate thugs. The chemical exposure was catching up with us. Mike was coughing blood. Jennifer's hands were shaking uncontrollably. I could taste metal in my mouth and feel my vision blurring at the edges. The ghosts had bought us time, but they couldn't cure what the toxic gases had done to our bodies. We needed medical help soon, or we'd die in these woods whether Blackstone's security found you, yes or not. That's when the voices started again. Not the security team. We'd left them far behind. These voices were older, familiar. "This way, Samuel Darkwater," the young miner ghost, materialized beside the deer trail, pointing toward a different path. Behind him, I could see the faint outlines of his 46 companions. "You promised to make them pay," he said. "But first, you must survive to keep that promise." The ghosts led us through the forest by paths no living person could have found, down slopes too steep for security teams to follow, around ravines that would have trapped us for hours, through thickets that parted like curtains at their touch. And slowly, impossibly, the chemical poisoning began to fade. The metallic taste left my mouth. Mike's coughing subsided. Jennifer's hands grew steady. "How?" I asked the young ghost. "This mountain has been our home for 50 years, he replied. "We know how to draw poison from those who don't deserve to die." 2 hours later, we emerged from the forest at the main highway. Lisa Whitehawk's EPA truck was waiting, hazard lights flashing, engine running. "Sam!" She jumped out and ran toward us. "Your emergency beacon went dead hours ago. I was afraid—" "We found it," I interrupted. "Found everything. Toxic waste dump, illegal burial of chemical weapons, corporate cover-up going back 15 years. We have samples, documentation, everything we need to shut them down." Lisa stared at us. 3 people who should have been dead from exposure, carrying evidence that could bring down one of the largest coal companies in West Virginia. "How did you survive?" she asked. I looked back at the forest. The 47 ghosts stood at the tree line, barely visible in the dawn light. The young miner raised his hand in farewell. "We had help," I said, "from people who've been waiting 50 years for justice." The Blackstone coal scandal broke 3 days later. Front page of every newspaper in the state, lead story on national news. EPA exposes toxic waste conspiracy, and coal company used mine as chemical dump. Ran alongside photos of the waste drums we documented and the corporate memos Lisa had uncovered. The executives tried to claim ignorance, of course, blamed rogue employees, faulty paperwork, regulatory confusion, but the evidence was overwhelming. Internal communications proving they'd known about the illegal dumping since 1960. Payoff records showing bribes to inspectors and local officials. Medical reports they'd suppressed documenting cancer clusters in downstream communities. 43 corporate executives were indicted on federal charges. The EPA seized all Blackstone coal assets and began the largest environmental remediation project in West Virginia history. The cleanup would take decades and cost billions, but at least it was happening. I testified before Congress twice, told them about the toxic waste, the cover-up, the threat to public health. I didn't mention the ghosts. Some truths are too large for official reports. But late at night, when I'm working on environmental cases, I sometimes feel them watching. 47 miners who died because profit mattered more than safety, who spent 50 years waiting for someone to care enough to listen. They're not just at Black Rock Hollow anymore. I've encountered them at other sites: chemical plants, nuclear facilities, industrial waste dumps. Wherever corporate greed has left bodies in the ground and poison in the water, the dead are starting to speak up. The living world is finally listening. My lung damage healed completely, which doctors called miraculous, and I called supernatural intervention. Jennifer and Mike recovered too, though they both transferred to different agencies. Some experiences change you in ways that make normal work impossible. I stayed with environmental enforcement, got promoted to senior investigator with jurisdiction over the entire Appalachian region. My success rate is a no. Swal. Nearly perfect, according to my supervisors. They don't know I have help from witnesses who can't be bribed, intimidated, or killed, because they're already dead. Lisa Whitehawk and I work together now, following up on cases where the official story doesn't match the evidence, places where companies claim everything is clean and safe, but the water tests tell different stories, industrial sites where workers report strange accidents and impossible equipment failures. We've learned to recognize the signs: unexplained cold spots, electronics that malfunction in specific patterns, witnesses who describe seeing people in outdated work clothes. The dead have a lot to say about corporate accountability. Black Rock Hollow is a federal Superfund site now, surrounded by chain-link fence and warning signs. The cleanup crews report strange incidents: tools arranged in memorial patterns, voices from sealed tunnels, equipment that works perfectly until supervisors try to cut corners on safety protocols. I visit sometimes, ostensibly to check on remediation progress. But really, I go to listen. The 47 miners are still there, watching over the work, making sure it's done right this time. Last month, a Blackstone coal executive was found dead in his prison cell. Heart attack, the coroner said, though the man was only 45 and in perfect health. The guards reported that just before he died, he'd been talking to his cell wall about miners and explosions and how sorry he was for what happened in 1924. Justice takes many forms. I keep my promise to the ghosts every day. Every corporate environmental crime I expose, every executive I help convict, every community I protect from toxic contamination. It's all part of the debt I owe to 47 dead miners who trusted me with their truth. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder if I'll join them someday. If the years of chemical exposure and underground dangers will catch up with me eventually. And if they do, will I become another voice calling for justice from beyond the grave? The Tiashishis. Aught doesn't frighten me anymore. There are worse things than being dead. There's being alive and doing nothing while others suffer. The ghosts taught me that. They taught me that some promises transcend death, and some fights are worth continuing forever. Corporate America is about to learn that lesson too. The dead are getting organized, and they have all the time in the world. My name is Jonathan Nightfall, and I've been walking these mountains at night for 16 years. People think that's a strange name, but my Cherokee grandmother always said it meant something special. God's gift, one who walks in darkness. Back then I thought it was just a pretty story. Now I know better. I'm a forest ranger for the Chattahoochee National Forest in Georgia. My specialty is night patrol, which means I'm out there when most folks are safe in their beds. I hunt poachers mostly, people who come into our woods to kill deer illegally or steal rare plants, or worse. In 16 years, I've made 45 arrests. I know these woods better than I know my own backyard. Blood Mountain has always been my favorite patrol area, even though it gives some people the creeps. It's 22 miles from the nearest town of Dahlonega, and there's no real road up there, just old logging trails. The Cherokee used to consider it sacred ground. My great-grandmother told me stories about the old burial sites up there from before the Trail of Tears in 1838. A lot of our people are buried in those hills. Most nights, Blood Mountain is peaceful. The wind moves through the pines, owls call to each other, and raccoons rustle through the underbrush looking for food. I've got excellent night vision from my Army days. I was a sniper in Korea, So I can see things in the dark that would surprise most people. But even I have limits. I never believed in ghost stories or anything like that. When other rangers talked about shadow people they'd seen moving around at night, I figured they were just tired. Working night shifts for years can mess with your eyes and your brain. Shadows start looking like people when you've been staring into darkness for 10 hours straight. That was before March 1971, before I learned that some shadows don't need anything to cast them. It was a new moon that night, which meant total darkness except for my flashlight. The temperature had dropped below freezing and my breath came out in white puffs. I was checking the area around the old Cherokee burial mounds, a place where poachers liked to set up camps because it was so remote. That's when I found the first body. The man was lying face down about 50 feet from the biggest burial mound. He was wearing hunting gear and had a rifle next to him, so I knew right away he was a poacher. But something was wrong with the scene. Very wrong. For one thing, he was positioned perfectly, like someone had laid him out on purpose. His arms were spread wide and his face was turned toward the burial mound like he was bowing to it. For another thing, there was no blood anywhere, but his skin was paper white. In the beam of my flashlight, he looked like he'd been drained. I called it in on my radio, but I was so far out that I could barely get through to headquarters. All I could do was wait for backup and try to secure the scene. That's when I noticed the other thing that was wrong. The shadows around the burial mound were moving, not swaying like they should when tree branches moved in the wind, moving on their own, like they were alive. I told myself it was just the stress of finding a dead body. My eyes were playing tricks on me, but I kept watching those shadows, and they kept moving in ways that didn't make sense. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees while I waited, and in that bitter cold, with that dead poacher lying there like an offering to something ancient and angry, I started to wonder if maybe those old Cherokee stories weren't just stories after all. Backup didn't arrive until sunrise, and by then the shadows had gone back to behaving like normal shadows. Detective Mike Rodriguez from the GBI took one look at the scene and whistled low. 16 years, So we've been doing this job, he said, crouching next to the body. Never seen anything like it. The medical examiner was a thin woman named Dr. Sarah Chen. She'd driven up from Atlanta, and she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. No obvious cause of death, she announced after her initial examination. No wounds, no signs of violence. But look at this. She lifted the dead man's arm. His fingernails were torn and bloody, like he'd been clawing at something. But there were no defensive wounds, no scratches or cuts anywhere else on his body. It's like he was fighting something that wasn't there, Dr. Chen said. They found his wallet and identified him as Roy Hutchins, 42 years old, from Gainesville. He had a wife and 2 kids. In his truck, they found enough illegal hunting equipment to put him away for a year, plus something else that bothered me. A detailed map of the Cherokee burial sites. Someone had marked all the sacred spots with red X's. How would he know about these places? Detective Rodriguez asked me. These aren't on any public maps. I didn't have an answer. The Cherokee burial sites were known to local tribes and some historians, but most people had no idea they existed. 2 days later, we found the second body. This one was a woman named Lisa Park, 35, from Athens. She was an amateur archaeologist who liked to hunt for Native American artifacts, which is highly illegal on federal land. Like Roy Hutchins, she was positioned facing the burial mounds, arms spread wide. Like Roy, she had no injuries except for torn fingernails. And like Roy, her skin was paper white, like something had drained all the blood right out of her. Dr. Chen was baffled. I've never seen blood loss like this without a single puncture wound. It's almost like... Like what? Detective Rodriguez asked. Like something sucked it right out through her skin. That night, I decided to patrol the area alone. I know that sounds stupid, but I had to understand what was happening on my mountain. I'd been protecting these woods for 16 years. If something, was killing people up here. I needed to know what it was. I parked my truck at the base of the mountain and hiked up the old logging trail. The moon was a little bigger that night, giving me just enough light to see the trees around me. Everything seemed normal at first. The usual night sounds, owls, wind, small animals moving through the brush. But as I got closer to the burial mounds, the sounds stopped completely. No owls, no wind, no rustling. The forest went dead silent, like something had scared every living thing into hiding. I pulled out my night vision binoculars, military grade, the best you can get. Through them I could see the burial mounds clearly, the scattered rocks that marked ancient graves, the tall pines that surrounded the area like guardians. And I could see shapes moving between the trees. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. They didn't walk like people. They flowed, like liquid shadow poured into human forms. I counted at least 6 of them, circling the burial area. Through the night vision, they showed up clear as day, but when I lowered the binoculars and looked with my naked eyes, I couldn't see them at all. That's when my equipment started failing. The night vision binoculars went dead, even though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. My flashlight flickered and dimmed, my radio crackled with static. But I could still see those shapes moving in my peripheral vision, and I could feel them watching me. I'm not ashamed to say I got out of there fast. Whatever was on Blood Mountain, it wasn't natural, and it wasn't friendly. The next morning, I drove into town to visit Thomas Ravensong, a Cherokee medicine man who'd helped me understand the cultural significance of various sites over the years. Thomas was in his 70s, with long gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He'd always been willing to share the old stories, but when I, too, told him about the bodies and the moving shadows, his expression went dark. "You've seen them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Seen what, Thomas?" "The shadow walkers, the spirits of our people who died on the Trail of Tears. They've been sleeping in those burial mounds for over 100 years, but something has awakened them." He made us coffee and sat across from me at his kitchen table. In 1838, soldiers forced our people from their homes. Many died on the long march to Oklahoma, but some never left Georgia. They were killed right there on Blood Mountain, and their bodies were thrown into mass graves. I'd heard parts of this story before, but Thomas had never told it with such heaviness in his voice. The shadow walkers are the spirits of those murdered people. They protect the burial sites from those who would disturb them or treat them with disrespect. Usually they sleep, but lately what? Thomas looked out his window toward the distant mountains. Too many people have been digging up there, taking artifacts, disturbing graves, treating sacred ground like their personal treasure hunt. The shadow walkers have had enough. A chill ran down my spine. What do they do to people who disturb the graves? They drain the life from them, touch your shadow, and they can pull the soul right out of your body, leave you empty, like a shell. I thought about Roy Hutchins and Lisa Park, lying there white as paper with their arms spread toward the burial mounds. "How do you stop them?" I asked. Thomas met my eyes. "You don't stop them, Jonathan. You either respect the dead or you become one of them." Word got out fast that something weird was happening on Blood Mountain. The local newspaper picked up the story, and within a week we had reporters, paranormal investigators, and thrill seekers coming from as far away as Atlanta. The last thing we needed was more people wandering around up there, but I couldn't legally keep them out of a national forest. Detective Rodriguez and I tried to set up a perimeter, but Blood Mountain covers thousands of trees. We couldn't watch it all. On March 15th, we found the third body. This time it was a paranormal investigator named David Kim who'd come down from Nashville with electromagnetic field detectors and thermal cameras. We found him at dawn, positioned like the others, arms spread, facing the burial mounds, skin drained white. His expensive ghost hunting equipment was scattered around him, all of it dead. But David Kim had managed to capture something before he died. His camera was still running when we found him, though the battery was almost dead. Detective Rodriguez and I watched the footage back at the station. For the first 30 minutes, it showed David walking around the burial site, talking to his camera about unusual energy readings and temperature fluctuations. Then at timestamp 2:17 a.m., the shadows started moving. It was subtle at first, just a shifting in the darkness behind the trees. But as David continued his investigation, the movements became more obvious. Shapes detached themselves from tree trunks and began following him, human-shaped but flowing, like they were made of liquid darkness. David never noticed them. They stayed just outside his flashlight beam, perfectly silent, but the camera picked them up clearly. At 2:34 a.m., David stopped talking. He stood perfectly still in the center of the burial ground, his flashlight trained on one of the larger mounds. The shadows had completely surrounded him, at least a dozen of them, standing just beyond his circle of light. Then one of the shadows moved forward. It stepped into David's flashlight beam, and for just a moment you could see what it really was. Not just a shape made of darkness, but the shadow of a person. A Cherokee man in traditional clothing, his face marked with old sorrows. He reached out one shadowy hand toward David's back. The moment the shadow touched David's shadow on the Jichaban round, David collapsed, just dropped like all the life had been sucked out of him. The camera kept rolling for another few minutes, showing the shadows moving around David's body, positioning him with his arms spread toward the burial mound. Then the camera died. Detective Rodriguez and I watched the footage 3 times. Neither of us spoke for a long while after the third viewing. "What do we do with this?" Rodriguez finally asked. "We don't show it to anyone," I said. "Not yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with." But I already knew what we were dealing with, thanks to Thomas Ravensong. The Shadow Walkers were hunting anyone who came to disturb their rest, and they were getting stronger. That night, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of going up to Blood Mountain alone, I asked Thomas to come with me. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we hiked up the old logging trail. "Once you see them clearly, really see them, you can't unsee them, and they'll know you can see them." "I need to understand," I said. "This is my forest. These are my woods to protect. If there's something up there killing people, I have to know how to deal with it." Thomas carried a small leather bag filled with items I couldn't identify: herbs, stones, other things that meant something in Cherokee tradition. As we climbed higher, he started singing under his breath, words in a language I didn't understand. "What's that?" I asked. "A song for the dead," he said, "to let them know we come in peace." When we reached the burial grounds, Thomas stopped singing. The forest had gone completely quiet again, that unnatural silence that meant we weren't alone. Thomas reached into his leather bag and pulled out a handful of tobacco. He scattered it around one of the burial mounds while speaking in Cherokee. Then he sat down cross-legged on the ground and motioned for me to join him. "Sit," he said, "and whatever happens, don't run. If you run, they'll chase you. And if they chase you, I'll end up like the others." "Yes." We sat in the darkness for maybe 20 minutes. I was starting to think nothing would happen when the temperature dropped 30 degrees in about 10 seconds. My breath came out in great white puffs, and frost began forming on the ground around us. That's when they came. They rose from the burial mounds like smoke, taking human shape as they moved. Dozens of them, men, women, even children, all Cherokee, all wearing the clothing of their time period, all made of living shadow. They surrounded us in a perfect circle, close enough that I could have reached out and touched them. One of them stepped forward. He was tall and dignified, with long hair and a face that spoke of great wisdom and terrible grief. When he looked at me, I felt like he was seeing straight into my soul. Then he spoke, not with his mouth, but directly into my mind. "You are not like the others." His voice echoed in my thoughts. "You protect this place." I found my voice somehow. "Yes, I'm a forest ranger. I've been protecting these woods for 16 years. The sacred places have been violated. Graves have been robbed. Our people's rest has been disturbed. We cannot allow this to continue." "I understand," I said, and I meant it. "But there are innocent people coming up here too. People who don't know about the burial sites, who don't mean any harm." The shadow looked at Thomas, who nodded slowly. Then the shadow turned back to me. "You have Cherokee blood," he said. "You understand the old ways. Will you help us protect this place?" I felt something change in that moment, like a door opening in my mind. Suddenly I could see not just the shadows around us, but into the spirit world itself. I could see the pain these souls carried, the injustice of their deaths, the desperate need to protect what little remained of their people's sacred ground. "Yes," I said, "I'll help you." "Then you will be our voice in the world of the living. But know this, those who come here with evil in their hearts will face our judgment. We cannot rest while our graves are desecrated." The shadows began to fade, melting back into the burial mounds. But before the tall one disappeared, he reached out and touched my shadow on the ground. I felt something pass between us, not the life-draining touch that had killed the others, but a sharing. He gave me a piece of his sight, his understanding, his connection to the spirit world, and I gave him a piece of my promise to protect this place. When they were gone, Thomas and I sat in the restored quiet of the forest for a long time. "You're different now," Thomas finally said. I nodded. I could feel it. I could see things I'd never seen before, understand connections I'd never noticed. The boundary between the living world and the spirit world had become thin for me. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we make sure people understand that some ground is sacred, some places demand respect, and some shadows remember old sorrows that can never be forgotten." The next few days passed quietly, but I knew it wouldn't last. Word about the deaths on Blood Mountain was spreading, and more people were coming to investigate. The Shadow Walkers were getting restless, and I could feel their anger like a storm building in the distance. On March 22nd, everything came to a head. A group of artifact hunters from South Carolina arrived in 3 trucks, loaded with metal detectors and digging equipment. They'd done their research and knew exactly where the Cherokee burial sites were located. They weren't interested in paranormal investigation or cheap thrills. They were there to make money selling Native American artifacts on the black market. Their leader was a man named Carl Brennan, a professional grave robber who'd been arrested twice in other states but never convicted. He had 5 men with him, all armed, all experienced at illegal excavation. Detective Rodriguez and I tried to intercept them at the base of the mountain, but they'd started their hike before dawn and taken a different trail. By the time we realized where they'd gone, they were already at the burial sites. I called Thomas and asked him to meet me at his house. "They're digging up the graves," I told him. "Right now. I can feel the Shadow Walkers' rage from here." Thomas's face went pale. "If they disturb the actual burial mounds..." "What?" "The Shadow Walkers will kill them all, and then they'll be so angry, so full of rage, that they might never go back to sleep. They could start hunting anyone who comes onto the mountain, innocent or not." I thought about the hikers, the campers, the families who came to Blood Mountain every year for innocent recreation. If the Shadow Walkers went completely wild, a lot of innocent people would die. "I have to get up there," I said. "Not alone. This time I'm coming with you, and we're bringing help." Thomas made some phone calls, and within an hour, we had 6 Cherokee men from the local community, all of them traditionalists who understood the old ways. They came armed with rifles, but also with sage, tobacco, and other sacred items. We hiked up Blood Mountain as fast as we could, but by the time we reached the burial grounds, Carl Brennan's team had already started digging. They'd torn into 2 of the smaller mounds and were working on a third. Ancient bones lay scattered on the ground. Sacred items that should have stayed buried were piled next to their digging equipment. The Shadow Walkers were going insane. I could see them clearly now with my enhanced sight. Dozens of them, rising from every disturbed grave, their forms more solid and angry than I'd ever seen them. They surrounded the artifact hunters, who kept working, completely unaware of the spiritual storm building around them. "Can't they see them?" I whispered to Thomas. "Not yet, but they will." Carl Brennan was directing his men to dig deeper in, to the largest mound, when the temperature dropped. All 6 of them stopped working at the same time, their breath suddenly visible in the frigid air. "What the hell?" one of them muttered. That's when the shadows became visible to normal eyes. It started with movement in their peripheral vision, shapes that were there when they looked sideways but gone when they looked directly. Then the shapes became more solid, more real. Within minutes, Carl Brennan and his crew were staring at dozens of Cherokee spirits surrounding their excavation site. One of Brennan's men dropped his shovel and ran. He made it about 50 yards before a shadow walker caught up with him. The spirit reached out and touched the man's shadow on the ground. He collapsed instantly, his face going white, his body going limp. The other 5 men started shooting. Their bullets passed right through the shadow walkers without any effect. You can't kill something that's already dead. But the spirits could touch them, could drain the life from them with a single contact between shadow and shadow. 2 more men fell before Carl Brennan figured out what was happening. "The shadows!" he screamed. "Stay out of your own shadows!" It was smart advice, but impossible to follow. The sun was directly overhead, casting shadows beneath all of them, and the shadow walkers could make the shadows move, stretching them like living things toward their victims. Thomas stepped out from behind the trees where we'd been watching. "Carl Brennan," he called out, "you need to stop digging. Now!" Brennan spun around, his rifle trained on Thomas. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm someone who can save your life. But only if you listen." The shadow walkers had stopped their attack when Thomas appeared. They knew him, respected him, but they were still there, still surrounding the artifact hunters, still ready to drain the life from anyone who continued to desecrate their graves. "You're interfering with legal excavation," Brennan shouted, though his voice shook. "There's nothing legal about what you're doing," I said, stepping out to join Thomas. "You're on federal land, digging into protected burial sites, stealing artifacts. You're looking at 20 years in federal prison. I'll take my chances with the law over those things." Brennan gestured at the shadow walkers with his rifle. That's when the leader of the shadow walkers, the tall, dignified spirit I'd met before, stepped forward. He looked at Carl Brennan with eyes full of righteous anger. "You have murdered our people twice," his voice echoed in all our minds. "Once in life, and now again in death. There can be no forgiveness for this." Brennan's remaining 2 men dropped their weapons and ran. The shadows chased them, but Thomas called out something in Cherokee and the spirits stopped their pursuit. The 2 men kept running until they disappeared down the mountain. Now it was just Carl Brennan, facing down dozens of angry Cherokee spirits. "Please," I said to the shadow walker leader, "let me handle this. Let the law punish him. If you kill him here, it will only bring more trouble to this place." The spirit looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at the scattered bones, the violated graves, the sacred items lying in the dirt. "Some crimes demand immediate justice," he said. Brennan raised his rifle toward me, but before he could fire, his own shadow on the ground began to move. It stretched toward the nearest burial mound, dragging him forward. He fought it, but you can't fight your own shadow. The shadow walker leader stepped forward and placed one translucent hand on Brennan's shadow. Carl Brennan's scream cut through the mountain air like a blade. Then he collapsed, his skin white as paper, his eyes staring at nothing. The shadow walker leader looked at me one last time. "The sacred ground is protected. Let all who would disturb it know the price of disrespect." Then the spirits faded back into their burial mounds, leaving us alone with the dead. We reburied the scattered bones with proper Cherokee ceremonies. Thomas and the other traditional men sang the old songs while we placed each fragment back where it belonged. Detective Rodriguez arrived with a full forensics team, but there wasn't much to investigate. Carl Brennan had died of unknown causes, just like the others. The 2 men who had escaped told wild stories about shadow people and Cherokee spirits, but nobody believed them. They were charged with federal crimes for illegal excavation on protected land. The other 3 men who had died were labeled as victims of the same unknown phenomenon that had killed the others. The case was officially closed as unexplained deaths due to unknown environmental factors. The area around the Cherokee burial sites was declared off-limits to the public, with heavy fines for anyone caught trespassing. But I knew the real story, and I knew my job had changed. I continued working as a forest ranger, but now I was also something else, a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The Shadow Walkers had given me the ability to see into the spirit realm, And with that gift came responsibility. People still died on Blood Mountain sometimes, but only those who came with evil intentions. Poachers who ignored the warning signs, artifact hunters who thought they could get rich robbing graves, developers who wanted to build resorts on sacred ground. The Shadow Walkers were always watching, always protecting their people's final resting place. I started working with Cherokee communities throughout Georgia, helping them identify and protect other burial sites. Word spread quietly through Native communities about the ranger who understood the old ways, who could speak to the spirits and help keep sacred places safe. Thomas Ravensong passed away in 1985, but before he died, he taught me more of the traditional ceremonies and songs. "You're not just a forest ranger anymore," he told me. "You're a guardian of the sacred places. The spirits chose you out for this purpose." I retired from the Forest Service in 1991, but I never really stopped working. I still patrol Blood Mountain regularly, making sure the burial sites remain undisturbed. I still see the Shadow Walkers sometimes, especially on new moon nights when the darkness is complete. They don't speak to me as often as they used to, but I can feel their presence. They know I'm keeping my promise to protect their sacred ground. People ask me sometimes if I'm afraid of the spirits on Blood Mountain. The answer is no. The Shadow Walkers aren't evil. They're guardians, protecting what's sacred from those who would destroy it for profit or pleasure. But I'll tell you this, if you ever find yourself in the Cherokee burial grounds on Blood Mountain, remember that some places demand respect, some ground is sacred, and some shadows remember old sorrows that can never be forgotten. The Shadow Walkers are still there, still watching, still protecting their people's graves. They'll let you pass through their territory safely, as long as you come with respect in your heart and take nothing that doesn't belong to you. But if you come with greed in your heart, if you come to disturb their rest or rob their graves, then you'll learn what Carl Brennan learned. Some shadows are more than just darkness. Some shadows are justice waiting in the dark. And on Blood Mountain, the shadows never forget. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and for 21 years I kept the trails safe in Cherokee National Forest. People always asked about my name, said it sounded fancy for a mountain girl. My mama told me it meant pearl from the thornfield, like something beautiful growing from pain. I never thought much about that until what happened at Widow's Peak. I was 49 that December, been working these mountains since I was 28. Lost my husband Jimmy in Korea, never had kids after that. The forest became my family. I knew every trail, every rock, every tree from here to Gatlinburg. The other rangers called me the Mountain Memory. I could tell you which trail got washed out in '58, where the old bear den used to be before the logging, even where the Cherokee used to camp before they got moved west. My cabin sat about 5 miles up from the main road, close enough to hear trouble but far enough to have peace. I liked the quiet, always did, even as a girl. Jimmy used to tease me about it, said I could hear a pin drop in a thunderstorm. Maybe that's why I was the first to hear them screaming. The mountains had rules. You learned them or you died. December ice storms were the worst. They'd coat everything so thick you couldn't tell rock from tree. Smart folks stayed home, but some people never learn. I first heard about Widow's Peak from old Tom Brewster when I started the job. He was retiring, been walking these trails since before the war. "Stay away from that place in winter," he told me, spitting tobacco juice into a rusty can. "Ain't nothing good up there when the cold comes." The peak got its name from the 1800s, back when times were harder than bark on a tree. When men died young and women had nothing left, some of them would climb up to that cliff and jump. The limestone formations up there looked like skulls if you squinted right, white bone color, wit, with holes that looked like eye sockets. Local folks said it was fitting, all those women dying there. I always figured the screaming sounds people talked about were just wind blowing through those rock holes. Made sense to me. Sound does funny things in mountains, bounces around till you can't tell where it's coming from. I'd heard plenty of weird noises in my years. Rocks falling that sounded like footsteps, tree branches that creaked like old doors. The mountains were full of sounds that could fool you. My job was simple. Keep the trails clear, help lost hikers, and make sure the historical sites stayed protected. I loved the work. Every morning I'd check my equipment, radio, first aid kit, rope, flares. Then I'd walk the trails, looking for damage, checking the markers, making sure everything was safe. That December morning started normal enough. Ice storm had blown through the night before, coating everything in crystal. Beautiful, but dangerous. I made my coffee extra strong and checked the weather radio. More storms coming. I figured I'd do a quick check of the easier trails, then head home before the next wave hit. But then the call came in. 3 climbers had gone up toward Widow's Peak yesterday before the storm. They should have been back by now. Their families were worried sick. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The trail to Widow's Peak was treacherous on good days, narrow, steep, with plenty of places to fall. In ice conditions, it was like walking on glass over a pit of knives. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Even with ice covering everything, you usually heard something: birds, squirrels, wind in the trees. But that morning, the forest held its breath like it was waiting for something bad to happen. About halfway up, I found the first sign of trouble. Footprints in the snow, 3 sets heading up the trail. But something was wrong with them. They looked frantic, like the people had been running instead of hiking carefully on ice. Then I heard it. Faint at first, like someone crying far away. But as I got closer to the peak, it got louder and clearer. It wasn't crying at all. It was screaming. The screaming was coming from the cliff face itself, not from the top where someone might have fallen, but from the white limestone rocks that looked like skulls. I'd been hearing mountain sounds for 21 years, but nothing like this. I radioed base camp. "This is Thornfield. I'm at Widow's Peak. Need rescue team and emergency medical. We got climbers in trouble." Static crackled back. "Copy that, Margaret. What's your situation?" "Not sure yet. Hearing distress calls from the cliff area. Sounds bad." I moved carefully toward the edge, testing each step on the ice. The screaming got louder. Multiple voices now, all high-pitched and desperate. It made my teeth hurt. Then I saw them. 3 bodies at the bottom of the cliff, maybe 60 feet down. Even from up top, I could tell they were dead. Bodies don't bend that way when there's life left in them. But if they were dead, where was the screaming coming from? I secured my rope and started down. The limestone face was slick as glass, and those skull-shaped rocks seemed bigger up close. Their eye holes were dark and deep, going back into the stone farther than natural caves should go. The first body was a young man, maybe 25. Climbing gear still attached, rope cut clean through. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror. Mouth open, eyes wide like he'd seen something impossible. The impact should have killed him quick, but he looked like he'd been scared to death before he ever hit the ground. The second climber was a woman about my age. Same terrified expression, same cleanly cut rope. Her hands were bloody from clawing at the rock face, trying to stop her fall. But here's what made my skin crawl. The rock where she'd clawed showed scratches, fresh ones, in solid limestone. The third body was the worst, a teenage boy, could have been more than 17. He was clutching something in his frozen fist. I pried his fingers open and found a piece of paper torn from a notebook. In shaky handwriting it said, "The skulls are screaming, help us, they want us to jump." That's when I realized the screaming had stopped. Complete silence now, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. I looked up at the skull-shaped rocks above me. For just a second, and I swear this is true, one of them seemed to turn and look down at me. I got back up that rope faster than a cat up a tree. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the radio. "Base camp, this is Thornfield. We got 3 fatalities. But something's not right here. Their ropes were cut, not frayed. And the screaming, it wasn't coming from them." "Margaret, you're breaking up. Say again about screaming?" I looked back at the cliff face. Those skull rocks were perfectly still now, just limestone formations like they'd always been, but I could feel them watching me. "Never mind, just send the recovery team. And tell them to bring plenty of rope. Good rope." The hike back down should have taken an hour. I made it in 30 minutes, slipping and sliding on ice but not caring. I needed to get away from that place. Back at the cabin, I made coffee with hands that still wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to write up my report, but how do you explain what can't be explained? 3 experienced climbers don't just cut their own ropes and jump, and rocks don't scream. I called my friend Robert Fieldstone over at the university. He taught geology, knew more about cave systems and rock formations than anyone in Tennessee. Bob, I need you to come look at something. Professional consultation. What kind of something? I told him about the limestone formations, about the unusual acoustic properties. I didn't mention the screaming. Not yet. Widow's Pea. Eek, huh? That's some interesting geology up there. Sure, I can take a look. But not till this weather clears. Those roads are death traps right now. After I hung up, I sat in my chair and tried to think reasonable thoughts. Wind through rock holes. Echo effects. Psychological stress from finding dead bodies. All of it made sense. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that skull rock turning to look at me. And late that night, when the wind picked up again, I could swear I heard screaming in the distance. Faint and far away, but definitely there. Multiple voices, all crying out in despair. I checked the weather radio. No more climbers were missing, no rescue calls. So who was doing all that screaming? I made myself another pot of coffee and stayed awake until dawn, listening to sounds that shouldn't exist, coming from a place I'd sworn to protect. Bob Fieldstone showed up 3 days later with a truck full of equipment, seismic sensors, acoustic meters, core sampling tools. He was a thin man with wild gray hair and eyes like a bird, always looking for details other people missed. So show me these singing rocks, he said, shouldering his gear. The hike up was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Even Bob noticed it. Where are all the birds? Been like this since the accident. Animals know things we don't. When we reached the cliff face, Bob got excited like a kid in a candy store. He ran his hands over the limestone formations, tapping them with a little hammer, making notes in a worn notebook. This is fascinating, Margaret. These aren't natural formations. I mean, they are, but they've been shaped by something unusual. Look at these mineral deposits. He pointed to dark stains running through the white rock like tears frozen in stone. What made them? Hard to say. Could be iron oxide, could be organic compounds. I'll need to run tests. He set up his acoustic equipment near the largest skull formation. Now, let's see about these sounds you mentioned. That's when the screaming started again. Bob nearly dropped his instruments. The sounds were coming. G from inside the rocks themselves, mournful wailing that made your bones ache. His equipment went crazy, needles jumping all over the place. That's impossible, he whispered. These readings show sound frequencies both above and below normal human range, like multiple voices screaming at once. I watched his face go pale as the truth hit him. This wasn't wind through rocks. This was something else entirely. Bob, we need to leave. Now. But he was scientist stubborn, the kind of man who poked rattlesnakes to see how they moved. He moved closer to the skull rocks, holding his equipment out like it would protect him. The screaming got louder. And then, God help me, the rock formation started to change. Not quickly, but like clay being slowly molded. The eye holes got wider. The mouth openings stretched into screams. And from somewhere inside the limestone, I heard voices. Real voices. Help us, they whispered. So cold. So alone. Join us. Bob's equipment was smoking now, overloaded by sounds it couldn't measure. He backed away from the rocks, his face white as snow. We need to document this, he said, but his voice was shaking. This could change everything we know about acoustic phenomena, about mineral composition. That's when she appeared. A woman in a tattered black dress standing right at the edge of the cliff. She was pale as morning mist, with dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. When she turned to look at us, her eyes were empty holes, just like the rocks. You understand loneliness, she said to me, her voice like wind through dead leaves. You know what it means to be left behind. Bob was fumbling with his camera, trying to get pictures, but every photo came out as just empty cliff and rocks. She was there, clear as day to our eyes, but the camera couldn't see her. "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "We are the forgotten ones, the ones who chose the rocks over the emptiness. But the emptiness followed us here, into the stone itself. Now we wait and call and hope someone will understand." More. Women began appearing, all in old-fashioned dresses, all with that same desperate sadness in their faces. They moved like smoke, there and not there at the same time. "The three who fell," I said. "You called them?" "They climbed toward us, but they were not the ones we sought. We need someone who knows our pain, someone who has felt the weight of being alone." Bob grabbed my arm. "Margaret, we have to go. Whatever this is, it's not natural. It's not safe." But I couldn't move, because she was right. I did understand. 20 years alone, watching other people's families, other people's lives, while mine stayed frozen in time, like everything else on this mountain. "Join us," the first woman whispered. "No more watching from outside. No more being the only one left." The pull was strong, like gravity working sideways. I felt my feet moving toward the cliff edge without my permission. The women smiled, reaching out with hands that looked real but cast no shadows. Bob grabbed me, hard. "Margaret, fight it!" His voice broke the spell enough for me to step back. The women's expressions changed from welcoming to angry, and the screaming from the rocks got so loud it felt like knives in my ears. "You cannot leave," they said together, their voices joining with the stone screams. "You belong with us. You have always belonged with us." The limestone skulls were moving now, definitely moving, turning to track our movement as we backed away from the cliff. Cracks appeared in the rock face, spreading like a spider web, and from the cracks came more voices. Older voices, speaking words in languages I didn't recognize. "Run," I told Bob. We ran down that mountain like the devil himself was chasing us, which maybe he was. Behind us, the screaming got louder and louder until it felt like the whole mountain was crying. We didn't stop until we reached my cabin, and even then Bob couldn't. "Stop shaking." "What were those things?" he asked. "The widows, the ones who jumped. They're still up there, trapped in the rocks somehow." Bob looked at his ruined equipment, at the blank photos, at his hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "No one will believe this. No one will ever believe this." I made coffee, but neither of us could drink it. We just sat there as darkness fell, listening to the distant sound of women crying in stone. Bob left that night and never came back. Can't say I blamed him, but I couldn't leave. This was my mountain, my responsibility. Those women were calling to me specifically, and I needed to understand why. I spent the next week reading everything I could find about Widow's Peak. Old newspaper articles, death records, local histories. The story was worse than I'd thought. Between 1847 and 1889, 17 women had jumped from that cliff, all of them widows, all during the worst part of winter. Back then, when your husband died, you didn't get his property. It went to his family or the bank. Women were left with nothing, no way to survive the mountain winters. The newspapers called it an epidemic of despair. One woman would jump, and others would follow like it was catching. The local church tried to put up a fence, but it kept getting torn down by ice storms. Finally, they just declared the area cursed and told people to stay away. But here's what got to me. I found their names. Mary Elizabeth Carter, age 32, jumped January 1847. Sarah Jane Morrison, age 28, jumped December 1851. 16 more names, all with ages, all with stories of being left alone when the cold came. They weren't monsters. They were women like me who'd lost everything and saw no other way out. That's when I decided to go back up there. Alone. The climb took forever in the snow, but I made it to the cliff just as the sun was setting. The skull rocks looked different. In the red light, less threatening, more sad. Like they were crying tears of stone. I didn't wait for them to appear. I sat down in the snow and started talking. My name is Margaret. Thornfield, I said to the rocks. I know who you are. I know why you're here. The screaming started soft this time, more like sobbing than shrieking. I lost my husband too. Jimmy Thornfield died in Korea before we could have children. Been alone for 21 years now, watching other people live the life I was supposed to have. The first woman appeared, the one in the black dress. Up close, I could see she'd been pretty once, before the sadness carved lines in her face. You understand, she said. I understand the loneliness. I understand the emptiness. But I don't understand why you're hurting people. More women materialized around her, 17 total, all in winter clothes from different decades. They looked at me with hope and hunger mixed together. We don't mean to hurt them, said another woman, younger than the first. But the loneliness is so strong. It calls to others who climb up here. We try to bring them with us, but they fight. They fall. Those 3 climbers, they weren't lonely like us. They had families waiting for them. We know that now. But in the stone, all voices sound the same. All pain echoes equally. I stood up, brushing snow off my jacket. The women watched me with those empty eye holes, waiting to see what I would do. You can't keep calling people up here. It's not right. Those young people didn't choose this. But you could choose, whispered the first woman. You could join us willingly. End the loneliness for all of us. And God help me. Part of me wanted to. Part of me had wanted to for years. It would be so easy to just step forward, to let the cold take me, to never have to wake up alone again. But then I thought about Jimmy, about what he'd say if he could see me now. Jimmy wouldn't want me to quit living just because he couldn't stay, I said out loud. And your husbands wouldn't want you to stay trapped in stone, hurting innocent people. The women looked at each other, confusion replacing hunger in their faces. We don't remember them anymore, said the youngest one. Only the cold, only the emptiness. Then let me help you remember. I pulled out the notebook where I'd written their names, their stories. One by one, I read them aloud. Told them about their lives before the sorrow, about the people they'd left behind, about the choices they'd made when the world seemed to offer no other options. As I spoke, something changed in their faces. The empty eye holes filled with tears that looked real even if they weren't. Some of them started to look more solid, more like they had been in life. We remember, whispered Mary Elizabeth Carter. We remember love before loss. The stone trapped us in our worst moment, said Sarah Jane Morrison. Made us forget everything else. But you don't have to stay trapped. You can choose to let go. That's when the screaming started again, but different this time. Not the desperate wailing of the trapped, but something angrier, something that didn't want to let them go. The cliff face cracked, and from the cracks came a voice older and darker than the others. They are mine, it said. Their despair feeds me. Their sorrow gives me strength. You cannot take them. The women backed away from the rocks, suddenly afraid. What is that? I asked. The thing that answers when people call to the void, Mary Elizabeth said. The thing that drinks despair and grows strong. We thought we were choosing death, but we were choosing to feed it instead. The limestone skulls were changing again, becoming something that had never been human. Eyes like black holes, mouths full of shadow instead of teeth. You understand loneliness, it said to me. You understand despair. Join them. Feed me your sorrow. The pull was stronger than before, like a river current, dragging me toward the edge. But now I understood what I was fighting. Not just the loneliness, but the thing that fed on loneliness, that turned natural grief into something hungry and wrong. No, I said. I choose to live with the sadness instead of letting it eat me alive. I grabbed Mary Elizabeth's hand, then Sarah Jane's. One by one, I linked hands with all 17 women. They felt solid and warm, like real people instead of stone echoes. You can choose too. Remember love instead of loss. Remember that you were more than your worst moment. Together, we stepped back from the cliff edge. The dark thing in the rocks screamed with rage, but it couldn't follow us. It was bound to the stone, to the despair that had fed it for over a century. The women began to fade, but peacefully this time, like morning mist burned away by sunlight. "Thank you," Mary Elizabeth said as she disappeared, "for helping us remember who we were." "Thank you for teaching me who I could be," I said back. The rocks stopped screaming after that night. The skull formations are still there, white limestone shaped by wind and time, but they're just rocks now. No faces in the stone, no voices calling from the deep. I filed my report with the Forest Service, stuck to the facts. Unstable geological formation, climbing area permanently closed for safety reasons. Bob backed me up with his scientific measurements, though he left out the parts his equipment couldn't explain. The families of those 3 climbers got closure, clean accident report, no blame assigned. Sometimes that's all people need, to know their loved ones didn't suffer, didn't choose to leave. I kept my job for 3 more years after that, until my back got too bad for mountain hiking. But I didn't spend those years alone anymore. Something had changed in me up on that cliff. The loneliness was still there, but it wasn't hungry anymore. It was just part of who I was, like the color of my eyes or the scar on my hand from a childhood fall. I started a grief support group in Gatlinburg, met once a week at the Kama Unity Center. Nothing fancy, just coffee and folding chairs and people who understood that sometimes the worst thing about losing someone isn't the sadness, it's the silence that follows. The group grew. Word got around about the widow lady who actually listened, who didn't try to fix everything with platitudes and casseroles. We helped each other remember that grief was love with nowhere to go, not a disease that needed curing. I still live in my cabin, but I don't live alone anymore. People know they can call if the quiet gets too loud, if the empty rooms start talking back. We take care of each other the way mountains take care of their trees, steady support, weathering the storms together. Sometimes, on winter nights when the wind is right, I can still hear something up at Widow's Peak. Not screaming anymore, just a soft sound like women singing lullabies to themselves. It doesn't call to me the way it used to. It sounds like peace. The official records show 17 women died at Widow's Peak between 1847 and 1889, all classified as suicides during periods of extreme hardship. What the records don't show is that in 1972, those same 17 women finally found their way home. Bob published a paper about acoustic anomalies in limestone formations. Got some recognition for it, even though he left out the most interesting parts. He visits sometimes, brings his new equipment to test the rocks. They always come back normal now, just stone and wind and the natural echoes that mountains make. People still climb in Cherokee National Forest, just not at Widow's Peak. The trail's been officially closed since 1973, marked dangerous due to unstable geology. Every now and then, someone asks me about it, hikers who heard stories, researchers interested in local folklore. I tell them the truth. It's a place where people went when they had nowhere else to go and where people learned that nowhere else doesn't have to mean alone. The mountains keep their secrets, but they also keep their promises. They remember everything, the sorrow and the healing, the falling and the finding. My name means pearl from the thornfield, something beautiful made from something painful. I think the mountains knew that about me before I did. And sometimes, when the winter wind blows just right through those limestone formations, it almost sounds like 17 women whispering thank you to anyone who knows how to listen. My name is Marcus Whitethorn, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I've seen plenty of strange things in these Virginia mountains, but nothing like what happened in Devil's Backbone Hollow back in October of '79. People always ask me why I stayed in the Forest Service so long. Truth is, these mountains get in your blood. I grew up with my grandmother after my folks died, and she knew every trail, every cave, every story these hills had to tell. She used to warn me about places where the old thing still walked, but I never paid much mind to her tales. Figured it was just mountain talk, you know? I was 44 then, still strong from my Army days in Korea. Been working the Jefferson National Forest since I got back stateside in '62. Started as a regular ranger, but I found my calling in backcountry rescue work. When folks got lost in the deep woods, they called me. When hunters didn't come home, I went looking. In 17 years, I'd brought back 47 people alive. Only lost 3 to the mountains, and that still ate at me. Devil's Backbone Ridge sits about 23 miles from the nearest paved road. It's rough country, all limestone caves and underground rivers, with mist that hangs in the hollows even on sunny days. The Cherokee used to avoid that area, called it something in their language that meant hungry shadow. I always figured they just didn't like the way sound carried strange in those caves. October weather that year was all wrong. Should have been crisp and cool, leaves turning colors, but it stayed warm. Unnaturally warm. The kind of heat that made animals nervous and kept the birds quiet. I'd been patrolling the outer trails when the call came in over my radio. "Marcus, you there?" It was dispatch, and Sally's voice had that tight edge it got when something was really wrong. "I'm here, Sally. What's going on?" "Got 3 hunt. Ears overdue from Devil's Backbone. Families are worried sick. They were supposed to check in yesterday morning." I knew those hunters. The Morrison boys, Bill, Tom, and their cousin Eddie from Richmond. Good men, careful in the woods. If they hadn't checked in, something was wrong. "I'll head that way," I told her. "Have Jake meet me at Overlook Trail if he's available." Jake Morrison was my usual partner for the deep country work. No relation to the missing hunters, just bad luck with the name. He was young, maybe 26, but he knew the forest and could keep up with me on the long hauls. The drive to Overlook Trail took me 2 hours on logging roads that barely deserved the name. The whole way, I kept thinking about how quiet the forest had been lately. Usually October brought all kinds of animal activity. Deer moving for winter, squirrels gathering nuts, birds heading south. But for the past week, it had been dead still. Even the insects seemed to have gone quiet. Jake was waiting at the trailhead, checking his gear. "Hey, Marcus, any word from the Morrison boys?" "Nothing since they signed in Thursday morning. Their truck's still here." I nodded toward the rusty pickup parked at the trail's end. "Looks like they made it to their usual spot at least." We shouldered our packs and headed into the woods. The trail to Devil's Backbone was tough, even for experienced hikers. Steep switchbacks, loose rock, and more than one place where a wrong step meant a long fall. But Bill Morrison had been hunting these hills for 15 years. He knew every tree. About 3 hours in, we found their first campsite. Everything looked normal. Fire ring properly set up, no trash left behind. Their tracks headed deeper into the hollow, toward the caves where the big bucks like to hide during hunting season. "They're good woodsmen," Jake said, studying the ground. "Following all the safety rules." That's when I noticed something odd. The hemlock trees around the campsite were turning brown. Not the normal autumn color change. This was different. The needles were falling off like the trees were dying from the inside out. "Jake, look at these trees." He walked over and touched one of the branches. The needles came away in his hand like ash. "That's weird. These should be green all winter." I'd seen disease kill trees before, but never this fast. And it was just the hemlocks in this one spot, like something had sucked the life right out of them. We pushed deeper into the hollow as the sun started getting low. The temperature dropped a little, but not much. Still felt like summer instead of October. No wind, no bird calls, just our boots on the rocky trail and the sound of water somewhere below. That's when Jake stopped dead and grabbed my arm. "Marcus, look." Up ahead, maybe 50 yards, 3 shapes lay scattered in a small clearing. Even from a distance, I knew what we'd found. The Morrison boys were dead, but not like any death I'd ever seen in the mountains. They lay in the clearing like they'd just laid down to rest, except their skin was gray as old leather and stretched tight over their bones. All 3 looked like they'd aged 50 years in 2 days. Bill Morrison had thick black hair when I saw him at the general store last week. Now it was white as snow and falling out in clumps. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. What happened to them? I'd seen plenty of bodies in Korea and in my ranger work. Heart attacks, falls, hypothermia, bear attacks. This was different. These men looked empty. Like something had sucked every drop of moisture right out of them. "Stay back," I told Jake, though I was just as confused as he was. Could be some kind of disease or poison. I pulled out my radio but got nothing except static. The iron ore in these mountains played hell with radio signals, but I'd never had it this bad before. The static almost sounded like voices whispering, just too quiet to understand. I started checking the scenes. Like I'd been trained. The bodies were arranged in a triangle about 10 feet apart. Didn't look like they'd fallen that way. More like someone had positioned them. All their gear was still there, untouched. Wallets had money. Watches were still on their wrists. "Look at this," Jake called from the edge of the clearing. Tracks in the soft mud near the water. But not human tracks. These were bigger, deeper, and the wrong shape. Like a man's footprint, but stretched out, with claw marks at the toes. Each print was nearly 2 feet long. "Bear?" Jake asked, but his voice said he didn't believe it. "No bear makes tracks like that." I knelt down for a closer look. The prints led from the clearing toward the mouth of a cave about 100 yards away. And look how deep they are. Whatever made these weighs a lot more than any bear. That's when I noticed the smell, not the smell of death, that I knew. This was different, sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It seemed to come from the cave mouth, carried on air that was definitely warmer than it should be. I was taking photos of the scene when Jake made a sound like a sick animal. I looked up and saw him backing away from Tom Morrison's body, his face white as paper. "Marcus," he said, and his voice cracked like a teenager's. "Look at his eyes." I'd been avoiding the faces, focusing on the scene, but now I looked. Tom Morrison's eyes were wide open, staring at the cave mouth. But they weren't just looking that way. They were full of terror, pure animal terror, frozen in place. All three of them were looking toward the cave. "We need to get out of here," Jake said. "Get the sheriff, get the coroner, get whoever handles this kind of thing." He was right. This was beyond anything a forest ranger was supposed to deal with. But as we packed up our gear, I kept thinking about the fourth member of their hunting party, Eddie Morrison, Bill's cousin from Richmond. "Jake," I said, "there should be 4 bodies here." His face went even whiter. "You think Eddie got away?" Before I could answer, we heard it. A sound from deep in the cave that might have been wind, might have been breathing, might have been someone calling for help. "Eddie!" I shouted toward the cave mouth. "Eddie Morrison!" The echo came back wrong, like the cave was bigger inside than it should be, or maybe like something was changing the sound as it bounced around. Jake grabbed my arm. "Don't," he said. "Don't call out again." But I was already walking toward the cave. 17 years of rescue work doesn't just shut off because things get strange. If there was even a chance Eddie Morrison was alive in there, I had to try. The cave mouth was bigger than I'd thought from a distance, big enough for 3 men to walk in side by side. The smell got stronger as we got closer, that sweet rot smell that made my stomach turn. But there was something else, too, a feeling like being watched. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam seemed weaker than usual, like the darkness was thicker here. I could see maybe 20 feet into the cave before the light just stopped. "Eddie Morrison," I called again. "This is Ranger Whitethorn. If you can hear me, make some noise." The echo came back, but this time it sounded like laughter. Deep, hollow laughter that went on too long and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake was tugging on my sleeve. "Marcus, we need to leave. Now." That's when I saw the scratches. Long claw marks gouged into the rock wall of the cave entrance about 15 feet up. No animal could reach that high, and the marks were fresh, rock dust still scattered on the ground below. I was backing away from the cave when my flashlight beam caught something else. Another set of tracks, smaller than the big ones we'd found earlier. Human tracks, Eddie Morrison's boots. The tracks led into the cave. He went in there, I told Jake. Eddie went into that cave. Then he's dead, Jake said. Same as the others. We can't help him now. But as we turned to leave, we heard it again. This time it was definitely a voice. Weak, barely human, but calling out words I could almost understand. Help! Me! It was coming from inside the cave. I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life, but walking into that cave probably topped them all. Jake tried to stop me. Marcus, this is insane. Whatever killed those men is still in there. If there's a chance Eddie's alive, I can't just leave him. I checked my gear one more time. Flashlight, rope, first aid kit, radio that wasn't working anyway. You stay here. If I'm not back in an hour, go get help. Like hell I'm staying here alone. Jake pulled out his own flashlight. But if we die in there, I'm gonna haunt you forever. The cave entrance felt like walking into a mouth. The moment we stepped inside, the temperature jumped up 20 degrees. That sweet rot smell got so strong, I had to breathe through my mouth. Our flashlights seemed even weaker, like the darkness was pushing back against the light. The cave tunnel went straight back for maybe 50 feet, then split into 3 passages. The walls were covered in some kind of moisture that wasn't quite water. When I touched it, it felt warm and oily, and my finger came away with a smell like old meat. Which way? Jake whispered. The human tracks went down the middle passage, but something made me look up at the cave ceiling, and I nearly dropped my flashlight. More scratch marks, deep gouges running along the rock like something had been crawling across the ceiling. Something big. Middle passage, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Follow the tracks. We'd gone maybe 100 feet when we heard it again. That voice calling for help, but weaker now and closer. The tunnel opened up into a bigger chamber. Our lights Revia led a space about the size of a basketball court, with a small underground stream running along one side. The sound of water should have been comforting, but it just made everything feel more isolated. That's where we found Eddie Morrison. He was alive, but barely. Sitting against the far wall, looking like he'd aged 20 years since I'd last seen him. His hair was streaked with gray. His face was lined and sunken, and when he looked at us, his eyes were cloudy like an old man's. Eddie! I ran over to him. What happened? Are you hurt? He grabbed my arm with hands that felt like bird claws. It took them, he whispered. The Hollow Man. It ate them up from the inside. Jake was scanning the chamber with his flashlight. Marcus, we need to get him out of here right now. Eddie was trying to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. It's coming back, he said. It always comes back when the sun goes down. I looked at my watch. We had maybe an hour of daylight left outside. In the cave, it was already full dark. That's when Jake's flashlight started dimming. Not like the battery was dying, like something was absorbing the light. His beam, which should have reached clear across the chamber, was getting shorter and weaker by the second. What the hell? Jake shook the flashlight, but it kept getting dimmer. Mine was doing the same thing. In a matter of seconds, we went from 20 feet of visibility to maybe 5 feet. And in that shrinking circle of light, I started to see something else. Shadows that moved wrong. Shadows that seemed to stretch toward us like reaching fingers. Eddie was clawing at my jacket now. It's coming! It knows we're here! The temperature in the chamber dropped 15 degrees in about 10 seconds. Our breath started showing up in the air, and frost began forming on the walls. But somehow, the air still smelled like that sweet rot. That's when we heard the breathing. Deep, slow breaths that echoed through the chamber like wind through a canyon. But there was no wind. And the breathing seemed to come from everywhere at once. Abba, Ovus, beside us, from the walls themselves. Back to the entrance, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, slow and steady. We helped Eddie to his feet and started moving, but with each step, the breathing got louder, and our lights kept getting weaker. By the time we reached the tunnel that led out, we could barely see our own hands. That's when Jake screamed. I spun around and saw something that still gives me nightmares. A shape moving in the darkness behind us, but not walking, flowing, like liquid shadow poured into the shape of a man, but wrong, too tall, too thin, arms that hung down past where its knees should be, and where its face should have been, there was nothing, just emptiness that hurt to look at. Eddie collapsed, and I could see him aging in real time, gray spreading through his hair like spilled paint, wrinkles appearing around his eyes, his skin going loose and dry. The thing was feeding on him, draining his life away just by being close. I did the only thing I could think of. Reached into my pocket and pulled out the little cloth bag my grandmother had made me carry. Iron and salt for the old ones, she used to say. I'd kept it all these years more for sentiment than belief. I threw the iron filings from the bag at the shadow thing. The reaction was immediate. The creature reeled back like I'd hit it with a live wire. Where the iron touched it, the shadow writhed and twisted, and for just a second I could see something underneath. Bones. Ancient yellow bones wrapped in hungry darkness. Run! I grabbed Eddie under one arm, Jake got the other, and we stumbled toward the cave entrance as fast as we could manage. Behind us, the thing was making a sound like wind through a graveyard. But it wasn't following. The iron had heard it, or at least made it cautious. We broke out into the evening air just as the sun was touching the horizon. Eddie collapsed. Bit again, but this time he was breathing easier. Whatever that thing was, it seemed to have less power outside the cave. What was that? Jake was shaking so hard he could barely hold his flashlight. I looked back at the cave mouth. In the growing twilight, it looked like an open wound in the hillside. I think my grandmother would have called it the Hollow King. Eddie grabbed my sleeve again. It's been here forever, he whispered. I saw the bones. Hundreds of people. It feeds on life itself. That's when we heard the sound from inside the cave. Not breathing this time. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming toward the entrance. We ran. We made it maybe half a mile before Eddie collapsed for good. The thing in the cave had drained too much out of him. He was still breathing, but barely, and he looked like a man in his 80s instead of 35. Leave me, he whispered. It's coming for all of us now. I could hear it behind us. Not footsteps anymore, but something worse. The sound of trees dying, of leaves withering and branches cracking. Whatever the Hollow King was, it killed everything it passed by. We're not leaving you, I told Eddie, though I wasn't sure how we were going to carry him much farther. Jake was tough, but he was shaking with exhaustion and fear. That's when I remembered something from my grandmother's stories. Running water, I said. The old things can't cross running water. There was a creek, maybe 200 yards ahead. Not much more than a trickle this time of year, but it was the best chance we had. We helped Eddie to the creek and waded in. The water was ice cold, even though the night air was still warm. Eddie seemed to get a little stronger as soon as his feet touched the water. It's buying us time, I said, but it won't stop it forever. Jake was looking back toward the cave. How do we kill something like that? I thought about the iron filings, about my grandmother's stories, about everything I'd learned about the old Cherokee legends. I don't think we can kill it, but maybe we can trap it. The plan was simple and probably insane. The underground stream that ran through the cave came from somewhere deeper in the mountain. If we could redirect it, flood the cave system, maybe we could trap the Hollow King in the deep places where it belonged. There's an old beaver dam about a mile upstream, I told Jake. If we can break it loose, send all that water down here at once. You want to flood the cave? Jake looked at me like I'd lost my mind. How's that going to stop a shadow monster? Eddie was the one who answered. It's not just shadow, he said, his voice stronger now that we were away from the thing. I saw its bones. Old bones, but still bones. It needs the cave to hide in during the day. I wasn't sure if flooding the cave would kill the Hollow King, but it might trap it long enough for us to get help. Real help. The kind that came with dynamite and bulldozers. We left Eddie by the creek and headed upstream. The beaver dam was old but solid, maybe 4 feet high and holding back a good-sized pond. In the dark, with our dying flashlights, it was dangerous work. But we found the weak spots and started pulling away logs and packed mud. That's when we heard the sound again. The Hollow King was following the creek downstream looking for us. We could hear it killing everything it passed. Frogs going silent, night birds falling out of trees, even the insects stopping their chirping. "Hurry," Jake whispered, pulling at another log. The dam was starting to give way. Water was trickling through the gaps we'd made, then flowing faster, but it needed one more push to really break loose. I was pulling on a key support log when Jake grabbed my shoulder. It found Eddie. Down by the creek, maybe 300 yards away, we could see the Hollow King. Even in the darkness, it was visible as a deeper shadow, 12 feet tall and thin as a scarecrow. Eddie was screaming, "Ut!" The sound was getting weaker. The dam chose that moment to break. Water came rushing down the creek bed like a flash flood, carrying logs and debris and anything else in its way. The sound was like a freight train, and I hoped it would be enough. We ran back toward where we'd left Eddie, but the creek was a raging torrent now. Couldn't see him anywhere. Couldn't see the Hollow King either. Then Jake pointed downstream. There! The thing was standing in the flood, water rushing around it like it was made of stone. The water didn't seem to hurt it, but it wasn't moving forward either, like it was stuck somehow. But Eddie was gone, carried away by the flood, or drained completely by the monster. Either way, we'd failed to save him. The Hollow King turned toward us, and even at a distance I could feel its hunger. It wanted us next, wanted to drain away our lives like it had the Morrison boys. But the water was working, not killing it, but holding it in place. The iron in the creek bed, the moving water, something about it kept the creature trapped. That's when I heard the rumbling from upstream. More water coming. The flood we'd started was bigger than I'd thought, bringing down all the rain and snowmelt from the high country. The Hollow King heard it too. For the first time, the creature showed something like fear. It tried to move away from the creek, but the rushing water seemed to pull at it like quicksand. The second wave of floodwater hit with twice the force of the first, and this time it carried the Hollow King away. Not destroyed, but swept downstream toward the deep caves where the underground rivers went too deep for light to follow. We watched until we couldn't see it anymore. Then we sat down in the mud and tried to figure out how we were going to explain any of this. They found Eddie Morrison's body 2 days later, caught in a log jam 5 miles downstream. The official report said he drowned, trying to cross the flooded creek. The other 3 Morrison boys died of exposure and dehydration, though no coroner could explain how they'd lost so much moisture so fast. I told the sheriff everything, but he just looked at me like I'd been in the sun too long. Jake backed up most of my story, but we both sounded crazy even to ourselves. The cave collapsed in a rock slide, probably caused by all that flood water undermining the limestone. Case closed. The county declared the whole Devil's Backbone area unstable and closed it to hunting. Put up warning signs and everything, but they didn't need to. Word got around the mountain communities fast. Cherokee elders nodded like they'd been expecting this. Old-timers just said it was about time someone dealt with that hungry place. I aged 10 years in one night. Jake fared a little better, but his hair went gray at the temples, and he transferred to a desk job the next month. Said he was done with the deep woods. Me, I stayed on for another year, but I couldn't handle the backcountry anymore. Every shadow looked wrong. Every quiet place felt dangerous. I took early retirement and moved to town, got a job at the hardware store where the worst thing I had to worry about was mixing paint. But I kept in touch with the other rangers, the ones who worked the Appalachian chain, and sometimes, every few years, I'd hear stories. Hunters found drained of life in West Virginia. Hikers aged to death overnight in Tennessee. Missing people in North Carolina whose bodies turned up looking like they'd been dead for decades. Different mountains, different hollows, but always the same signs. Trees dying for no reason. Silence where there should be life. Tracks too big to be human, leading to caves that felt wrong. I think we didn't kill the Hollow King that night in Devil's Backbone, just moved it. Washed it downstream to some other dark place where it could wait and feed and grow strong again. My grandmother used to say the mountains were old, older than people, older than most, things. And some parts of them were hungry. Always had been, always would be. If you ever find yourself in the deep woods, and the quiet gets too quiet, and the shadows start moving wrong, remember what I'm telling you. Don't go into the caves. Don't trust the darkness. And if you see tracks that don't belong to any animal you know, turn around and get out. Because there are places in this world where the old things still walk. Places where the boundary between life and death isn't as solid as we like to think. And sometimes, if you're not careful, those old things might just follow you home. I'm 71 now, and I still carry iron filings in my pocket. Still won't camp near caves or quiet water. Some habits you don't break when they're the only thing that kept you alive. The mountains keep their secrets, most of the time. But sometimes, late at night when the wind's in the trees, I can still hear it calling. Still hungry, still waiting. And I know that someday somebody else is going to ignore the warning signs and go looking for something in the deep places. I just hope they're smarter than I was, or luckier. My name is Catherine Ironbridge, and I spent 13 years as a park ranger in the Pisgah National Forest. 13 years walking those mountain trails, tracking black bears, and thinking I knew every dangerous thing that lived in those woods. I was wrong. People always ask me why I became the first female ranger in our district. Truth is, I loved the mountains more than anything else. Got my PhD in animal behavior, specialized in predator management. By 1978, I'd relocated over 200 problem bears, dealt with every kind of wildlife emergency you can imagine. The mountains were my home, and I thought I understood them. Bear Wallow Mountain was different, though. Even the Cherokee avoided that area, called it where the hairy man hunts. I figured it was just old stories meant to keep people away from dangerous cliffs and bear dens. The mountain rose up steep and wild, covered in thick laurel bushes that grew so dense they called them laurel hells. You could barely push through them, and they blocked out most of the sunlight even in summer. November 1978 started cold. Early snow dusted the peaks, and hunting season brought the usual weekend warriors up from Charlotte and Asheville. I'd gotten used to pulling city folks out of trouble. Lost hunters, sprained ankles, the occasional bear encounter. Nothing I couldn't handle with my radio, my truck, and my .357 Magnum. That's when everything changed. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. State police found a hunting camp about 18 miles from the Blue Ridge Parkway, way back in the laurel thickets where cell phones don't work. 5 men from Charlotte, all experienced hunters, all dead. Looks like a bear attack, the dispatch crackled through my radio. You need to get up there and confirm before we call in the wildlife team. I loaded my gear and headed up the old logging road. The forest felt wrong that Mort him, Ning. Too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, nothing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I'd been in these woods thousands of times, but I'd never felt them watching me back. The hunting camp sat in a small clearing surrounded by mountain laurel and old oak trees. 5 tents, a fire pit, coolers full of food, and blood. So much blood. I've seen bear attacks before. Bears are powerful, but they're also predictable. They go for easy food, they avoid people when possible, and when they do attack, it's usually quick and defensive. This wasn't like that at all. The bodies were scattered around the camp like toys thrown by an angry child. But it was the bite marks that made my hands shake. Too big. Way too big for any bear I'd ever seen. The teeth marks in one man's shoulder were over 4 inches apart. A big black bear might leave marks 2 inches apart, maybe 2.5. I radioed for the state wildlife team and started taking photos. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were pressed deep in the soft earth near the fire pit, where someone had spilled water the night before. 20 inches long, almost 8 inches wide, with 5 distinct toe marks. But the strangest thing was the shape. They looked almost human, if humans had feet twice the normal size and claws instead of toenails. I measured them twice to make sure. 20 inches. I wear size 9 boots, and my foot is about 10 inches long. These prints were from something massive. The smell hit me next. Not the usual forest smells of earth and leaves, but something else. Something wrong, like sulfur mixed with wet dog and old meat. It hung in the air around the camp, thick enough to taste. I spent 3 hours documenting everything I could find. Claw marks 12 feet up the trunk of an oak tree. Branches broken 20 feet off the ground. The hunter's rifles scattered and unused. Whatever kill led them had been too fast for them to even shoot back. By the time I hiked back to my truck, the sun was getting low. The forest still felt dead quiet, like every animal for miles around had packed up and left. That's when I saw the Cherokee petroglyphs. I'd heard about them, but never seen them myself. Ancient rock carvings hidden deep in the laurel, older than anyone could remember. Local Cherokee elder Joseph Crow Feather had mentioned them once, said they told the story of something that hunted in these mountains long before white settlers arrived. The carvings showed a tall figure covered in hair, walking upright like a man, but built like something else entirely. Long arms, massive chest, and in every carving, it was hunting humans. I drove home that night with my windows up and doors locked, checking my mirrors every few minutes. For the first time in 13 years, the mountains didn't feel like home. They felt like something was watching me from the shadows between the trees. The wildlife team would arrive tomorrow, and I'd have to explain what I'd found. But deep down, I already knew they wouldn't believe the truth. How could they? I barely believed it myself. The next morning brought Danny Riverbend, a state wildlife officer I'd worked with for 5 years. Danny was good people, half Cherokee himself, grew up in these mountains, and could track a deer through solid rock. If anyone would understand what we were dealing with, it would be him. "Hell of a thing, Catherine," he said, looking at my photos from the camp. "You really think this was a bear?" "Look at these bite marks," I said, spreading the pictures across the hood of my truck. "And these prints. You ever see anything like this?" Danny studied the images for a long time. His face got darker with each photo. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he said finally. "Stories about things that lived in the deep woods before people came. She said some places were meant to stay wild." We hiked back to the camp together, along with Dr. Martinez from the State Forensics Lab. The clearing looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, like the forest was pressing in closer. The smell was stronger, too, that sulfur and rot smell that made your stomach turn. Dr. Martinez got to work examining the bodies while Danny and I searched the area for more evidence. The bite patterns were even stranger up close. Deep puncture wounds from massive canine teeth, but arranged in a way that didn't match any known predator. The spacing was all wrong, like the jaw that made them was shaped different from any normal animal. "These men didn't run," Martinez called out. "No defensive wounds on their hands or arms. Whatever got them, it was fast enough they couldn't fight back." That's when we found the survivor. He was about a mile from camp, wedged under a fallen log and covered in leaves. Jim Hartley, 43 years old, insurance salesman from Charlotte. Alive but barely conscious, his eyes wide and staring at nothing. When Danny tried to help him up, Hartley started screaming. "The hairy devil! It's still out there! Don't let it smell you! Don't let it know you're here!" We got him to the hospital, but he wouldn't stop talking about what he'd seen. A creature 9 feet tall, covered in dark matted fur, with glowing yellow eyes and arms that hung down to its knees. He said it had thrown his friend Mike 30 feet into a tree like he was tossing a football. "It wasn't hunting for food," Hartley kept saying. "It was hunting for fun, like it enjoyed the killing." The doctors sedated him, said it was shock and trauma. But I'd seen that look before, in the eyes of people who'd seen something their brain couldn't process. Jim Hartley had seen something real, something impossible, and it had broken something inside him. That evening, Danny and I made camp near the original site. Official protocol said we should wait for the full investigation team, but I wanted to see if Tawa, he creature, would come back. Danny brought his 2 hunting dogs, Rex and Blue, both experienced trackers who'd never been afraid of anything. We set up our tents just as the sun was setting. The dogs were nervous from the start, whimpering and staying close to the fire. Rex, who usually bounded ahead on every trail, wouldn't even walk to the edge of our small clearing. Around midnight, Blue started growling. It was a low, continuous sound, the kind of growl dogs make when they sense something dangerous but can't see it yet. Both dogs were facing the same direction, toward the thick laurel bushes on the north side of our camp. "You hear that?" Danny whispered. At first I didn't hear anything. Then, slowly, I became aware of a sound that shouldn't have been there. Breathing. Deep, slow breathing that seemed to come from somewhere just beyond the firelight. The dogs were shaking now, pressed against our legs and whining. Rex, a 90-pound German shepherd who'd faced down black bears without backing down, was practically trying to crawl into my lap. Then we saw the eyes. 2 yellow points of light, about 9 feet off the ground, watching us from the darkness between the trees. They didn't reflect our firelight like normal animal eyes. They seemed to glow with their own light, cold and intelligent and very, very angry. "Jesus," Danny breathed, reaching for his rifle. The eyes moved, not side to side like a normal animal, but up and down, like whatever they belonged to was studying us from different angles, testing us, deciding if we were worth the trouble. The breathing got louder, closer. I could smell that sulfur stench again, stronger now, mixed with something else, something like old blood and wet fur. Then came the sound that still wakes me up at night, a vocalization that wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite a scream, but something in between. It was loud enough to hurt our ears, and it carried intelligence. This wasn't just an animal making noise. This was communication. This was a warning. The yellow eyes disappeared. We sat by that fire until dawn, rifles ready, dogs pressed against us and trembling. Neither of us spoke about what we'd seen. What was there to say? We were trained wildlife professionals, and we'd just encountered something that shouldn't exist. When the sun finally came up, we found fresh tracks all around our camp. The creature had circled us for hours, staying just outside the firelight, studying us. The prints were everywhere, by our tents, near our truck, even right behind the log where I'd been sitting. It had been close enough to touch us, close enough to kill us, but it hadn't. That's when I realized we weren't just dealing with an animal. We were dealing with something that could think, something that could choose. And for reasons I couldn't understand, it had chosen to let us live. For now. Word spread fast through the mountain communities. 3 more hunting parties reported encounters over the next 2 days. Massive footprints, that sulfur smell, and glimpses of something huge moving through the trees. Then the killing started again. 2 brothers from Asheville found torn apart near their campsite on Wednesday morning. A solo hunter from Tennessee discovered Friday night 30 feet up in a pine tree, placed there like he was being displayed. The creature wasn't just killing randomly anymore. It was making a statement. I tried to convince my supervisor to close the area, but hunting season brought too much money to the local towns. Instead, they sent more rangers and told us to increase patrols. Like normal procedures would work against something like this. Danny and I started researching Cherokee folklore with Joseph Crow Feather, the tribal elder who lived near Cherokee. What he told us changed everything. "The petroglyphs you found," Joseph said, spreading old maps across his kitchen table. "They mark hunting grounds, but not human hunting grounds. That thing's hunting grounds. According to Cherokee oral tradition, the creature was once a warrior named Keetoowah, transformed by a medicine man's curse after he murdered children from a rival tribe. The curse made him huge and powerful, covered him in coarse hair, and gave him an eternal hunger for human flesh. But it also bound him to specific territory, the mountain ranges where his victims had lived. He hunts during the season when blood is spilled on his mountain," Joseph explained. "Hunting season brings the killing, and that calls to him, makes him stronger." The Cherokee had learned to avoid Bear Wallow Mountain during hunting season, leaving offerings of tobacco and cornmeal to appease the cursed warrior's spirit. But white settlers had forgotten the old warnings, and now people were paying the price. "How do you stop something like that?" I asked. Joseph's weathered face grew grim. "You don't stop Keetoowah. You survive him, and you hope he gets tired of killing before he gets tired of you." That weekend brought the worst of it. A group of 6 hunters from Georgia made camp in the same area where we'd found the first victims. Despite all our warnings, despite the newspaper stories, they insisted they could handle any bear or wild animal. They had experience, they said. They had guns. Sunday morning, we found their camp destroyed. This time, it wasn't just killing. The creature had arranged the bodies in a circle around the dead campfire, each one facing outward like sentries. Their weapons were stacked in the center of the circle, bent and twisted into useless metal sculptures. It was deliberate, artistic almost, like the creature was making art out of death. But the worst part was the tracks. They led directly toward the area where Danny and I had been camping. Fresh prints, still damp from the morning dew, heading straight for our position. The creature knew where we were, knew we were tracking it, and it was coming for us. We had maybe an hour before it reached our camp. Danny wanted to run, and I don't blame him. Any sane person would have packed up and gotten as far away as possible. But I couldn't leave. This was my mountain, my responsibility. Those people had died on my watch, in my forest, and I was the only one who might be able to stop it. We prepared as best we could. Set up tripwires, positioned ourselves with clear fields of fire, made sure our weapons were loaded and ready. Danny's dogs were going crazy by then, howling and trying to run back down the mountain. We had to tie them to a tree to keep them from bolting. The creature arrived just as the sun was setting. It didn't try to sneak up on us this time. It just walked into our clearing like it owned the place, which I guess it did. 9 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark fur that hung in matted clumps. Its arms reached almost to its knees, ending in hands that looked human except for the claws. But it was the face that froze my blood. It looked like a man's face, but wrong in every detail. The features were too large, too heavy, with a jaw that jutted forward and teeth that belonged on a predator. The eyes were the worst part, yellow and intelligent and full of ancient hatred. It stood at the edge of our firelight and studied us like we were specimens in a laboratory. Then it spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds that carried meaning. Guttural vocalizations that somehow communicated amusement, contempt, and promise all at once. It was telling us that we were next, that our weapons wouldn't help us, that it would take its time with our deaths. Danny shot first. His rifle cracked 3 times in rapid succession, all 3 shots hitting center mass. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it looked down at the bullet holes in its chest, then back at us. If anything, it looked annoyed. It charged. I've never seen anything move that fast. 1 second it was 30 feet away, the next it was on top of Danny, lifting him off the ground with one massive heat and around his throat. Danny tried to scream but could only make choking sounds. I put 6 rounds from my .357 into its back. The bullets punched through fur and flesh, but the creature barely noticed. It was too strong, too massive, too alien for normal weapons to do more than irritate it. With casual strength, it threw Danny 20 feet into the trunk of an oak tree. I heard bones snap on impact. Then it turned toward me. The creature stood over Danny's motionless body, yellow eyes fixed on me with something that might have been curiosity. Blood ran from the bullet wounds in its torso, but it moved like it felt no pain, like our weapons were nothing more than bee stings to something that powerful. I backed toward the fire, keeping my gun trained on its massive chest. My mind raced through everything Joseph Crow Feather had told us about Cherokee traditions, about appeasing angry spirits, about showing respect to things older and more powerful than human understanding. Kituwa, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I know who you are. The creature's head tilted slightly, like it was surprised to hear its name from my lips. Up close, I could see intelligence in those yellow eyes. Not animal cunning, but human-like thought trapped in a form that was anything but human. I dropped my gun and reached into my pack for the items Joseph had given me. Sacred tobacco, white cornmeal, and a small piece of turquoise wrapped in red cloth. Traditional Cherokee peace offerings, meant to show respect for spirits and ask for safe passage through dangerous territory. I came here to stop the killing, I said, laying the offerings on the ground between us. But I understand now. This is your hunting ground. These are your mountains. I'm sorry people forgot the old ways. The creature stepped closer, its massive form blocking out the firelight. I could feel heat radiating from its body, could smell that sulfur scent mixed with something wilder and older. It leaned down until its face was inches from mine. When it breathed, I felt my hair move. When it studied my face, I saw something almost human looking back at me, something that had once been a man, transformed by centuries of hatred and violence into something monstrous, but maybe something that could still remember what it meant to be shown respect. The creature looked at the offerings I'd placed on the ground. With one clawed finger, it touched the turquoise, then the tobacco. For a moment, its features softened almost imperceptibly, like it was remembering something from a long time ago. Then it straightened up and stepped back. It didn't leave immediately. Instead, it walked to where Danny lay unconscious against the tree. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was going to finish him off. Instead, it simply looked down at him, then back at me. A warning. Danny was alive because I'd shown the proper respect, but that protection was fragile and temporary. The creature melted back into the forest as silently as it had appeared, leaving only its sulfur scent and the memory of those intelligent yellow eyes. I rushed to Danny and found him breathing but badly hurt. Several broken ribs, a concussion, and internal bleeding that would need immediate medical attention. I radioed for emergency helicopter evacuation and spent the next 3 hours keeping Danny stable until help arrived. As the medical team loaded him onto the stretcher, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It let us live," he whispered. "Why did it let us live?" I didn't have an answer then. I'm not sure I have one now. The helicopter took Danny to Asheville, where he spent 2 weeks in intensive care. He recovered physically, but something in his eyes had changed. He transferred to a desk job in Raleigh the next month and never came back to the mountains. I stayed. My supervisor wanted me to file a report blaming everything on a rogue black bear, maybe rabid or defending cubs. The official story would be that we'd scared it off and expected no further incidents. The area would stay open for hunting, tourists would keep coming, and everyone could pretend that nothing unusual had happened. I couldn't do it. Instead, I wrote the truth. All of it. The impossible footprints, the supernatural strength, the intelligence behind those yellow eyes. I documented everything we'd found, included photos and measurements, and recommended that Bear Wallow Mountain be closed to all human activity during hunting season. They buried my report in a classified file and transferred me to office work in Asheville. Officially, Catherine Ironbridge had suffered a breakdown after a traumatic bear attack and was no longer suitable for field duty. Unofficially, I became something else entirely. That was over 40 years ago. I'm retired now, living in a cabin near Cherokee, close enough to the mountains to keep watch but far enough away to sleep at night, mostly. Every hunting season, I get calls. Park rangers, local police, sometimes just scared hunters who've seen things they can't explain. Footprints that don't match any known animal. Campsites destroyed by something impossibly strong. Glimpses of a massive figure moving through the trees. The creature is still there. Still hunting. Still claiming 2 or 3 victims each season, always during hunting season. Always people who venture too deep into the laurel hells of Bear Wallow Mountain. I help when I can. Teach people about the offerings, about showing respect, about understanding that some places belong to older powers than human civilization. Sometimes it works. Sometimes people listen to an old woman's warnings and change their plans. Sometimes they don't. Jim Hartley, the survivor from that first encounter, never recovered fully. He spent 15 years in and out of psychiatric hospitals, always talking about the hairy devil that lived in the mountains. He died in 2003. And his last words were a warning to stay away from Bear Wallow Mountain during hunting season. Danny Riverbend lasted longer. He kept in touch. Ouch for about 10 years, sending Christmas cards and occasional phone calls. But the nightmares never stopped, and eventually he stopped calling. I heard he moved to Florida, as far from the mountains as he could get. I stayed because someone has to remember. Someone has to know the truth about what lives in those ancient forests. What happens when people forget the old warnings and venture into places that were never meant for human feet? The Cherokee petroglyphs are still there, hidden in the laurel thickets, telling their story to anyone wise enough to listen. They speak of a cursed warrior who hunts eternally in the high places, seeking revenge for wrongs committed long ago against his people. But they also tell of respect, of offerings, of ways to pass safely through dangerous territory if you know the proper rituals and understand your place in the larger order of things. I've been back to Bear Wallow Mountain many times since that night. Always during daylight, always with the proper offerings, always with deep respect for the power that dwells there. I've seen tracks, caught glimpses of movement in the deep woods, smelled that sulfur scent on the wind. But I've never seen those yellow eyes again. I think the creature understands that I remember the old ways, that I teach others to show proper respect. As long as I do that, as long as some people still listen to the warnings, there's a kind of peace between us. But that peace is fragile. Each year brings new hunters who don't know the stories, don't understand the rules, don't believe that anything supernatural could exist in our modern world. They venture into the deep woods with their GPS devices and high-powered rifles, confident that technology and firepower can handle any threat nature might offer. They learn differently. If you're planning to hunt in the southern Appalachians, remember this: some mountains hold more than trees and wildlife. They hold memory and justice and powers older than human civilization. Respect those places. Leave offerings when you enter dangerous territory, and if you smell sulfur on the wind, if you see footprints too large for any known animal, if you catch glimpses of yellow eyes watching from the shadows, don't try to be a hero, just leave. The mountain remembers everything, and some debts take forever to pay. Author's note: Catherine Ironbridge passed away in 2019 at the age of 87. This account was found among her papers and is published here with permission from her estate. Bear Wallow Mountain remains open to the public, but visitors are advised to exercise extreme caution during hunting season and to respect local Cherokee traditions regarding sacred sites. My name is Elizabeth Moonwhisper, and I've been fighting forest fires in West Virginia for 14 years. I thought I'd seen everything the mountains could throw at me. Lightning strikes that split 100-year-old oaks in half, wildfires that jumped roads like they were sidewalks, and winds that could knock a grown man flat on his back. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. I grew up hearing my Cherokee grandmother's stories about lights that danced in the dark woods, spirits that whispered your name before something bad happened. "Lizzie," she'd say, stirring her tea with a gnarled finger. Some things in these old mountains don't follow the rules white folks wrote in their science books. I'd nod and smile, but inside I was thinking about gas molecules and electrical charges. You see, I've got a meteorology degree from West Virginia University. I measure things. I study weather patterns and atmospheric pressure. When people see strange lights in the forest, I grab my equipment and find the real reason. Swamp gas, ionized air from lightning, maybe car headlights bouncing off low clouds. That was before Raven's Roost Ridge changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The call came in on September 15, 1975. 3 hikers had been found dead near the old oak grove on the ridge about 20 miles from the nearest town. No wounds, no signs of a struggle. The sheriff said they looked like they'd been scared to death, but that's not how people really die, right? Fear can make your heart race, but it can't just stop it cold. "Moonwhisper," my supervisor Dave called from his office. "Pack your gear. The locals are talking about witch lights again. Need you to check for atmospheric disturbances before the news crews show up and make us all look like idiots." I'd heard the stories my whole life. Back in 1692, 13 women were hanged from the big oak tree on Raven's Roost. Were accused of witchcraft. Really, they were just herb women who knew how to cure a fever or help a difficult birth. The story goes that before the rope tightened around their necks, they cursed the families of everyone who'd condemned them. Local folks claimed their spirits still haunted the ridge, appearing as dancing balls of light during the harvest moon. But I knew better. Will-o-wisps happen when decaying plant matter releases phosphine and methane gases. When these gases hit oxygen, they glow. Simple chemistry, not supernatural revenge. I loaded my truck with electromagnetic field detectors, a digital thermometer, my camera, and a Geiger counter. You never know what kind of minerals might be underground in these old mountains. The drive up to Raven's Roost took 2 hours on winding forest roads that hadn't been paved since the Roosevelt administration. The higher I climbed, the more the hair on my arms stood up. I told myself it was just the change in altitude affecting the air pressure. The oak grove sat at 4,100 feet, surrounded by a natural circle of moss-covered stones that looked like they'd been placed there on purpose. The hanging tree stood in the center, a massive oak with 13 thick branches spreading out like the arms of a giant. Even in broad daylight, something felt wrong about the place. The air was too still. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The silence pressed against my ears like water. I set up my equipment and started taking readings. The electromagnetic field detector started clicking immediately, not unusual near iron-rich soil. But then the needle began swinging wildly, jumping from normal to off the charts and back again. That shouldn't happen unless there was a major electrical storm brewing, but the sky was clear blue without a cloud in sight. Just mineral deposits, I muttered, adjusting the calibration. Probably iron ore depot sits underground, messing with the readings. But as I spoke, the temperature dropped 10 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. My breath came out in small, white puffs. The digital thermometer read 47 degrees, then 42, then 38. In September, in the middle of a warm afternoon. That's when I noticed the scorch marks. The burn patterns were all wrong. I've studied fire behavior for more than a decade. How flames spread, what they consume first, how they move with wind and terrain. These marks looked like someone had taken a giant blowtorch and drawn perfect circles around the base of each oak tree. But the trees themselves were untouched. The grass inside the circles was black and brittle, but step 1 inch outside the ring and everything was green and healthy. No natural fire burns like that. No electrical discharge creates perfect geometric patterns. I was photographing the third circle when my radio crackled to life. The voice that came through wasn't Dave back at headquarters. It was speaking in an old-fashioned accent, using words I barely recognized. "Good wife Moon Whisper, thou art of Cherokee blood. The spirits of thy grandmother's people know justice from wickedness. But these pale folk who condemned us, their children's children still draw breath while we hang still in the cold earth." I dropped the radio like it had caught fire. It hit the ground hard enough to crack the plastic casing, but somehow it kept talking. 13 innocent souls, murdered for healing hands and herb wisdom. Our blood cries out for... I clicked the radio off, then turned it back on. Nothing but static. I tried calling headquarters, but all I got was white noise and what sounded like wind howling through tree branches. "Equipment malfunction," I said out loud, trying to keep my voice steady. "Old radios pick up all kinds of interference in these mountains." But my hands were shaking as I packed the radio back in my kit. I decided to examine the hanging tree more closely. Up close, I could see deep grooves in the bark about 8 feet off the ground. 13 of them, spaced evenly around the trunk. They looked like rope marks, but rope doesn't cut that deep into living wood. And the grooves looked fresh, like they'd been made yesterday instead of nearly 300 years ago. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from the direction of the hiking trail, maybe a quarter-mile down the ridge. A man's voice, high and terrified, cutting through the unnatural silence like a knife. Then it stopped as suddenly as it started. I grabbed my first aid kit and ran toward the sound. The trail twisted between thick stands of pine and mountain laurel, and my boots slipped on loose stones as I half ran, half stumbled downhill. Behind me, branches cracked and rustled like something large was following, but every time I looked back, nothing was there. I found him about 10 minutes later. A young man, maybe 25, wearing expensive hiking boots and a backpack covered in patches from national parks. He was sitting on a fallen log, staring straight ahead with the widest eyes I'd ever seen. No injuries, no blood. But he was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. "Sir, I'm Elizabeth Moon Whisper with the Forest Service. Are you hurt?" He turned those huge eyes toward me, and I saw something in them that made my stomach clench. Pure animal terror. "The lights," he whispered. "They knew my name. They knew my great-great-grandfather's name. They said he was there when they hanged the witches. They said the debt has come due." "What lights? There's nothing here but..." That's when I saw them. 13 points of pale blue light were floating between the trees, maybe 50 yards away. They bobbed and weaved like fireflies, but they were too big, too bright. And as I watched, they began to move toward us with slow, deliberate purpose. "We need to go," the hiker said, scrambling to his feet. "We need to go right now." But as he stood, his legs gave out completely. He collapsed face first onto the trail and didn't move again. I knelt beside him and checked for a pulse. Nothing. His skin was already cold to the touch. The lights were getting closer. I'd seen ball lightning before, during severe thunderstorms. I'd read about plasma formations caused by seismic activity, but these lights were moving in formation, like they were being controlled by some intelligence, and the air around them shimmered with heat even though the temperature kept dropping. One of them drifted close enough that I could see it clearly. Inside the pale blue glow was the outline of a woman's face, hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, and a black line around her neck like a burn mark. She opened her mouth and spoke without making a sound, but somehow I could hear the words inside my head. "Child of the old blood, you have Cherokee wisdom in your veins. Tell these pale folk that the harvest moon rises tomorrow night. Tell them the 13 will walk again, and their justice will be swift and final." The lights began to fade, but not before I heard something else. The sound of 13 ropes creaking in a wind that wasn't there. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's face floating in the darkness, felt those words echoing in my skull. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, maybe carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. But my grandmother's voice kept whispering in the back of my mind. "Some things don't follow white folks' rules, Lizzie." By morning, 2 more bodies had been found. Sheriff Marcus Webb called me at sunrise. "Moon Whisper, we got a problem. 2 more hikers found dead on Raven's Roost, same as yesterday. No wounds, no nothing. Just scared to death. And folks in town are talking about seeing lights dancing around the mountain all night long." "I'll be there in an hour," I said, already reaching for my coat. "Bring that college friend of yours," Webb added. "The one who knows about old history. Something tells me we're going to need all the help we can get." R. Samuel Greystone was the park's historian, a thin man in his 60s who knew more about West Virginia's past than anyone alive. I found him in the Historical Society building, hunched over a stack of old books and papers. When I told him what had happened, his face went pale. "Elizabeth, I've been researching the Raven's Roost trials all night. What I found, it's worse than the stories." He held up a yellowed piece of paper covered in spidery handwriting. "This is from Judge Cornelius Whitman's private journal, dated October 13th, 1692. Listen to this. The 13 herb women refused to confess their witchcraft even as the ropes tightened. The eldest, one Sarah Blackwood, spoke a curse upon myself and the 12 jury members who condemned them. She said our bloodlines would pay for this injustice generation after generation until the debt was satisfied in full." My mouth went dry. Bloodlines? The 13 men who condemned those women, their families never left this area. Their descendants still live here, Elizabeth. And according to this, he showed me a family tree he'd drawn on a piece of paper. 5 of those bloodlines still have living relatives in the county. The 3 hikers who died, I already checked. Thomas Carpenter, whose great-great-great-grandfather was the jury foreman. The other 2 were distant cousins of other jury members. He looked up at me with haunted eyes. "Elizabeth, they're being hunted. The spirits are tracking down the families of their killers." We drove up to Raven's Roost together, Sam's car loaded with historical documents and a bag full of Cherokee herbs my grandmother had given me years ago. I'd never used them, always thought they were just superstition. Now I clutched that bag like a lifeline. The oak grove looked different in daylight. The scorch marks had spread, forming a perfect 13-pointed star with the hanging tree at the center. More troubling, the rope marks on the tree had deepened overnight. They were so clear now I could see the individual fibers. "My God," Sam whispered. The historical accounts were accurate. They really did hang 13 women from this tree. I was taking electromagnetic readings when my equipment started going crazy again. But this time, the patterns weren't random. The needle was swinging in a steady rhythm. 13 beats, pause, 13 beats, pause. Like a heartbeat. Or like 13 hearts beating in unison. "Sam," I said slowly, "what time does the harvest moon rise tonight?" He checked his watch and an almanac from his bag. "Full moonrise is at 8:17 p.m. Why?" Before I could answer, we heard screaming from the hiking trail. Not one voice this time, 3 or 4 people, all screaming at once. We ran toward the sound and found a family of tourists, mother, father, 2 teenage kids, standing in a tight circle, pointing at something in the trees. There was nothing there that I could see, but their terror was real enough. "The lights!" the mother shrieked. "They're everywhere! They're saying names! Old names I've never heard before." The father was trying to shield his children with his body. "Get away from us! We didn't do anything!" "What names?" Sam asked urgently. "What names are they saying?" "Whitman," the teenage boy whispered. "They keep saying Judge Whitman, over and over." Sam's face went white as paper. He fumbled for his family tree chart with shaking hands. "Oh no. Oh dear God, no. What is it?" "The boy. He's got the same last name as the judge who sentenced them. Elizabeth. This family. They're descendants of the man who ordered the executions." That's when the lights appeared in broad daylight. 13 glowing orbs materialized between the trees, bright enough to see even in the afternoon sun. They moved in perfect formation, circling the terrified family like wolves around prey. And as they moved, the temperature plummeted. Our breath came out in thick white clouds, and frost began forming on the pine, needles. One of the lights drifted close to the teenage girl. She screamed and tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. None of them could move. They were frozen in place like statues. The light touched the girl's forehead, and suddenly she was speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. "The blood of Cornelius Whitman flows in thy veins, child. For his sins thy family must pay the price thy ancestors escaped for too long." "Stop it," I shouted, stepping between the lights and the family. "They're innocent. They didn't do anything wrong." The lights turned toward me, and I felt their attention like ice water in my veins. But somehow I found the courage to keep talking. "I carry Cherokee blood, the blood of people who knew healing from harm. These people had nothing to do with what happened 300 years ago." The lights hesitated. Then one of them, the same one with the woman's face I'd seen before, drifted closer to me. When she spoke, her voice was sad and ancient. "Child of 2 worlds, thy grandmother's people knew justice. But these pale folk condemned us for nothing more than healing the sick and easing birth pains. For 3 centuries we have waited. Tonight, under the harvest moon, we will have our due." The lights began to fade, but the woman's voice lingered. "At moonrise, we walk the earth again. Those who carry the blood of our killers will face the same terror they gave us. Only acknowledgement of our innocence can break the curse now." The family collapsed as soon as the lights disappeared, but they were still breathing. Barely. "Sam," I said grimly, "how many descendant families are left in the county?" He consulted his charts with shaking hands. "Including this family." 7. 7 families with about 20 people total." I looked at the setting sun. We had maybe 4 hours before moonrise. "Then we better figure out how to break a 300-year-old curse, and fast." We spent the next 3 hours in the town's historical society, surrounded by old books, Cherokee herb packets, and growing desperation. Sam had identified all 7 descendant families and was calling them, trying to convince them to leave town before moonrise. Most thought he was crazy. A few hung up on him. "They won't listen," he said, slamming down the phone after his latest call. "The Morrison family thinks it's some kind of prank. The Whitmans are hosting a harvest moon party tonight, for God's sake." I was reading through my grandmother's journal, hoping to find something, anything, about dealing with vengeful spirits. Most of it was herb recipes and weather lore, but one entry made my heart race. When the dead cry out for justice, only truth can set them free. Speak the names of the innocent. Acknowledge the wrong. Sometimes the only way forward is to face the past with courage and honesty. Sam, I said slowly, what if we can't stop the curse? What if the only way to end this is to let it happen? What do you mean? Think about it. 13 innocent women were murdered for helping people. No one ever said they were sorry. No one ever admitted they were wrong. Maybe the spirits don't want revenge. Maybe they just want recognition. Sam stared at me. You're talking about letting them kill innocent people. I'm talking about going up there and giving them what they really want. Justice, acknowledgement, the truth. At 8:00 p.m., we drove back up to Raven's Roost Ridge. The harvest moon was just beginning to peek over the mountains, huge and orange like a jack-o'-lantern. We brought everything we could think of: Sam's historical documents, my grandmother's sage and sweetgrass, and a lot of hope that we were doing the right thing. The oak grove had changed again. The scorch marks now formed a perfect circle around the hanging tree, and in the moonlight I could see shapes beginning to form in the shadows. 13 women in long white dresses, each with a dark line around her neck. They stood beneath their branches, whitey, hung. They're beautiful, Sam whispered, and I realized he was right. In life, these women had been healers, wise women who dedicated themselves to helping others. Even in death, there was something noble about them. The largest figure stepped forward, a woman with long gray hair and gentle eyes. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. I am Sarah Blackwood, eldest of the 13. For 3 centuries we have waited for acknowledgement of our innocence. Tonight, under the harvest moon, justice will be done. Sarah, I said, stepping into the circle of scorch marks. I know you were innocent. Everyone knows now. You were healers, not witches. Knowledge is not enough, child. The blood debt must be paid. But not by innocent people, I insisted. The men who condemned you are long dead. Their descendants had nothing to do with your deaths. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Then how shall justice be served? I looked at Sam, took a deep breath, and made a decision that would change everything. Let me speak for them. Let me acknowledge the wrong on behalf of all the living. Let me carry the debt. Elizabeth, no, Sam started, but I held up my hand. I carry Cherokee blood and the blood of the settlers who came after. I represent both worlds. Let me stand trial in their place. The 13 spirits looked at each other, and I could feel them communicating in ways I couldn't understand. Finally, Sarah nodded. Very well. But know this. To stand for them, you must face what we faced. You must experience the terror, the injustice, the betrayal. Are you prepared for that? My knees were shaking, but I managed to nod. I'm prepared. The spirits formed a circle around me, and suddenly I was no longer standing in the oak grove. I was in colonial Salem, watching 13 women being dragged to a makeshift gallows while a crowd of townspeople cheered. I felt their fear, their confusion, their desperate innocence. I experienced every moment of their trial, felt the ropes around my own neck, tasted the bitter terror of dying for crimes I'd never committed. But I also felt something else: forgiveness. These women had never wanted revenge on innocent people. They'd wanted acknowledgement, recognition, peace. They'd wanted someone to say, "We were wrong. You were innocent. We're sorry." When the vision ended, I was kneeling in the oak grove with tears streaming down my face. The 13 spirits stood around me, but they looked different now, peaceful, calm, ready to rest. Thank you, Sarah said simply. You have given us what we needed most, someone to remember us as we truly were. One by one, the spirits began to fade into the moonlight. But before Sarah disappeared completely, she pressed something into my hand. A small pouch of herbs that smelled like sage and cedar. Your grandmother's blood runs true in you, child. You have the gift of seeing between worlds now. Use it wisely. The curse broke that night. All 7 descendant families woke the next morning with no memory of being terrorized by mysterious lights. The bodies found on the hiking trail were ruled death by natural causes, heart attacks brought on by extreme physical exertion. The official report I filed blamed the electromagnetic anomalies on underground mineral deposits and unusual atmospheric conditions during the harvest moon. But I know the truth. Dr. Samuel Greystone aged 10 years in a single night. The historical documents he'd been researching crumbled to dust the moment Sarah Blackwood found peace, as if the spirits had been holding them together through sheer force of will. He retired from the Park Service 2 weeks later and moved to Florida, where he refuses to talk about what happened on Raven's Roost Ridge. As for me, I'm still fighting fires in West Virginia, but now I see things differently. That little pouch of herbs Sarah gave me sits on my desk, and sometimes, usually during thunderstorms or when the moon is dark, I can see things too. That aren't supposed to be there. Spirits of lost hikers who need help finding their way home. The ghosts of Cherokee warriors who died defending these mountains. Echoes of the past that never quite fade away. The area around Raven's Roost Ridge has been officially designated as an electromagnetic hazard zone. Access is restricted during harvest moons, and the Forest Service maintains a permanent monitoring station nearby. But local folks still report seeing lights dancing in the oak grove some nights, not the angry, vengeful lights of the 13 witches, but peaceful glows, like fireflies made of starlight. I think they're keeping watch, making sure nothing like that ever happens again. My grandmother always said some debts echo through the generations until they're paid in full. She was right about that. But she also taught me that the best way to honor the dead is to learn from their stories, to make sure their suffering wasn't meaningless. The 13 women of Raven's Roost Ridge were innocent. They were healers who died for the crime of helping others. Their names were Sarah Blackwood, Mary Whitehorse, Elizabeth Crowfeather, Hannah Moonwhisper, yes, my own ancestor, and 9 others whose names were lost to history until that night. Now they rest in peace, and their story is finally told. But late at night, when the wind howls through these old mountains and the moon hides behind storm clouds, I sometimes wonder about other places, other injustices that were never acknowledged. How many spirits are still waiting for someone to say, "We were wrong, you were innocent, we're sorry"? Some debts can only be paid with truth, and sometimes 300 years isn't long enough for the dead to forget the living. If you're ever hiking in the West Virginia mountains and you see strange lights dancing between the trees, remember the story of Raven's Roost Ridge. Remember the Sioux. That some lights are warnings, and others are invitations to finally make things right. But most importantly, remember this: the dead aren't always angry. Sometimes they're just tired of being forgotten. My name is Elizabeth Moonwhisper, and I've learned that the most dangerous fires aren't always the ones you can see burning. My name is Benjamin Stormcrow, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. Folks around here call me Ben. I work the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky, and I've seen things that would make your hair turn white. But before all this happened, I was just like anyone else. I thought ghost stories were just that, stories. I'm 47 now, been alone since my wife Sarah passed 3 years back. Cancer took her fast, too fast. My Cherokee grandmother used to tell me that some spirits get stuck between worlds, but I never paid much mind to that talk. I was a man of facts. Search and rescue. Cave emergency response. Things you could touch and fix and understand. The summer of 1972 was the hottest on record. The heat pressed down on the mountains like a heavy blanket, and the drought had turned most streams into dusty beds. That's when the Hamilton family went missing in Copperhead Hollow. Copperhead Hollow sits 25 miles from the nearest town, connected by a single dirt road that winds through thick woods. The cave system there is old limestone, carved out over thousands of years. It's beautiful if you know caves, but dangerous if you don't. I'd mapped most of it myself over the years. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Family of 4 from Louisville. Mom, Dad, 2 kids aged 8 and 10. They'd been camping near the cave entrance for 3 days. When they didn't check in with relatives, someone got worried. I loaded my truck with rope, lights, and medical supplies. The drive out gave me time to think. 19 years doing this work, and I'd pulled 89 people out of trouble spots, some alive, some not. Each rescue taught me something new about these mountains. When I got to their campsite, the first thing that hit me wrong was how neat everything looked. Too neat. The family's tent stood perfect, guy lines tight. Their food was still packed, put away proper. But scattered around the camp in perfect circles were the kids' toys, toy cars, a doll, blocks, like someone had arranged them just so. I'd seen plenty of abandoned camps. They're usually a mess. Clothes scattered, food left out, signs of panic or hurry. This looked like the family had just stepped away for a minute, meaning to come right back. The cave entrance yawned open 30 yards from the camp. Cool air flowed out of it, which felt good against the heat. But something else came with that air, a smell like old flowers and wet stone. In all my years mapping these caves, I'd never smelled anything like it. I checked their car, keys still in it, wallets and purse on the front seat. Nobody runs off into the wilderness without their money and identification. My gut told me they were in the cave, probably lost in the deeper passages. It happens more than you'd think. But those toy circles bothered me. Kids don't arrange their toys like that, not in perfect circles, not when they're getting ready to explore a cave. I radioed back to headquarters and told them I was going in. Standard procedure was to wait for backup, but something felt urgent about this one. The cave stayed cool year-round, but if they were hurt and couldn't move, time mattered. I strapped on my headlamp, checked my rope and radio, and headed into Copperhead Hollow. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as soon as I stepped inside. After the blazing heat outside, it felt like walking into a refrigerator. That's when I noticed the flowers. Fresh wildflowers lay scattered just inside the entrance. Black-eyed Susans and mountain laurel. Pretty flowers, but they don't grow anywhere near the cave. Someone had to bring them from miles away. But why would the Hamilton family carry flowers into a cave? My radio crackled. Static mostly, but I thought I heard something else underneath it. Nothing that might have been children laughing. The Hamilton family's trail was easy to follow at first. Muddy footprints led deeper into the cave. 2 adults and 2 children. The kids had small feet. The 8 and 10-year-old matched the missing persons report. But as I followed the trail, something felt off about it. The footprints were too perfect. In 19 years of cave rescues, I'd learned that lost people stumble. They backtrack. They leave scuff marks and drag marks. These prints walked forward in a straight line, like the family knew exactly where they were going. 20 minutes in, I reached what cavers call the cathedral room, a big open space with rock formations that looked like church columns. My headlamp beam swept across the walls, and that's when I saw them. Handprints. Small handprints pressed into the mud on the cave walls. But they weren't just any handprints. These were tiny, the size a 5 or 6-year-old might make. The Hamilton kids were 8 and 10. These prints were too small. I counted them. 12 different handprints, all the size of little children. They started low on the walls and went up higher than any small child could reach, like whoever made them had been floating. My radio crackled again. This time I definitely heard laughing. Not static. Children laughing, faint but clear. It seemed to come from deeper in the cave. "Hello?" I called out. "Hamilton family, can you hear me?" The laughing stopped. Then I heard something worse. Silence so complete it made my ears ring. In caves, you get used to little sounds. Water dripping, air moving, your own breathing and heartbeat. This was the kind of silence that feels alive. I followed the main passage deeper. The Hamilton family's footprints kept going, still in that weird straight line. But now, other prints joined them. Bare feet. Small, bare feet, like children running without shoes. The walls started to change too. Someone had carved things into the rock. Not recent carvings. These looked old, worn smooth by time. They showed children playing. Children holding hands, in circles. Children dancing around what looked like a fire. I'd studied the history of this area. In 1847, there had been a mining operation in these caves. Copper mining, mostly. One day in November, part of the cave system collapsed. 12 children died. Kids of the miners playing where they shouldn't have been while their fathers worked. But that was over 100 years ago. These carvings looked even older. My headlamp beam caught something moving ahead. I froze, listening. Footsteps, light footsteps, like children running. But I couldn't see anyone. "Hamilton family!" I shouted. "This is Park Ranger Stormcrow. If you can hear me, stay where you are." The running sounds stopped. Then I heard a voice, so faint I almost missed it. "Come play with us." It sounded like a little girl, maybe 6 years old. But her voice echoed wrong, like it came from all directions at once. I unclipped my radio. "Base, this is Stormcrow. I'm about half a mile into Copperhead Hollow. The missing family's trail is here, but there's something else. I'm requesting immediate backup." Static answered me. I tried again. Nothing. The cave passage split into 3 tunnels ahead. The Hamilton family's footprints went down the middle passage, but those small bare footprints scattered into all 3, like a bunch of kids had run off in different directions. I chose the middle passage and kept following the family's trail. The air got colder as I went deeper, cold enough that I could see my breath in the headlamp beam. That wasn't normal. Even in winter, caves stayed at a steady temperature. Then I heard the splashing. Water sounds came from ahead, not dripping, but splashing, like kids playing in a stream. I knew this part of the cave system. There was a small underground pool about 200 yards ahead. In the drought, it should have been almost dry. I moved forward carefully. The SPL. Ashing sounds got louder, mixed with giggles and whispers. Children's voices, but I couldn't make out words. The passage opened into the pool chamber. My headlamp lit up the water and my blood went cold. The pool was full, not just full, overflowing. Clear water spilled across the chamber floor. But in this drought, with the water table so low that pool should have been empty, and floating in the center of the pool was a small wooden boat, a toy boat painted red and white. It bobbed gently in water that should not have existed. On the far side of the pool, barely visible in the edge of my light, I saw them. Children. 12 children stood in the shadows, watching me. They wore old-fashioned clothes, the kind you'd see in pictures from 100 years ago. Long dresses for the girls, knee pants and suspenders for the boys. Their skin was white as cave limestone. Their lips were blue like they'd been swimming in cold water too long. And they were smiling at me. The little girl in front, maybe 7 years old, took a step toward the water. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Ranger," she said. "We've been waiting so long to have someone new to play with." That's when I noticed something that made my heart stop. Behind the children, barely visible in the darkness, were 4 adult-sized shapes lying on the ground, not moving. I grabbed my radio, hands shaking. Base, I need immediate backup at Copperhead Hollow. The missing family is here, and their..." Static filled the chamber. The radio was dead. The little girl stepped into the pool. The water should have been ice cold, but she walked through it like it was nothing. The other children followed her, and I could see them clearly now in my headlamp beam. They were all wrong. Their faces were too pale, their eyes too dark and deep. When they moved, they barely disturbed the water, like they weighed nothing at all. "Don't be scared," the little girl said. Her voice sounded sweet, but it echoed from the stone walls in ways that made my skin crawl. "We just want to play. We've been alone for such a long time." I backed toward the passage entrance, keeping my light on them. "Stay back. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help the Hamilton family." "The Hamilton family is here," said a boy about 10 years old. He pointed to the 4 shapes on the far side of the chamber. "They came to play with us, but they got tired so quickly." My beam swept over the prone figures. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton lay face down, not moving. The 2 kids, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jake, were curled up like they were sleeping, but they were too still, too quiet. "What did you do to them?" I demanded. "We played games," the little girl said. She was closer now, waist deep in the pool. Ring around the rosy, hide and seek, tag, but they couldn't keep up. They got so cold. That's when I understood. The cave temperature wasn't dropping naturally. These things, whatever they were pulling the heat out of everything around them. The Hamilton family hadn't gotten lost. They'd been led here. And now they were dying of hypothermia. I started backing away faster, but more children appeared in the passage behind me. They came out of cracks in the walls that were too small for any living child to fit through. Some looked older, some younger. All had that same pale skin and those deep, dark eyes. "You can't leave yet," said a boy who looked about 12. "We haven't finished playing." "The game isn't over," added a little girl with pigtails. "We need someone who can play longer, someone stronger." They started to circle me, and the temperature dropped even more. Frost began forming on the cave walls. My breath came out in thick white clouds. "We died in the dark," the first girl said. "Mama and Papa were working, and the ceiling fell down. We were just playing. We didn't mean to do anything wrong." "But we're still here," said the boy. "Still playing, still waiting for friends." Now I remembered the old stories. The mining accident of 1847. 12 children had been playing in the caves while their parents worked the copper veins. A support beam failed, and tons of rock came down. They'd been trapped in the dark, calling for help that never came. "You're the children who died in the cave-in," I said. "We didn't die," the little girl said, her voice turning sharp. "We're still here. We're still playing. And now you can play with us forever." The circle tightened. The cold bit into my bones. I could feel my strength draining away, just like what had happened to the Hamilton family. But I had advantages they didn't. 19 years in these caves had taught me every passage, every crack, every way out. And I had equipment. I pulled out my emergency flare and struck it. Red light blazed through the chamber, and the children stumbled back, covering their eyes. "The light!" one of them screamed. "It burns!" I ran for a side passage I knew led back toward the entrance. The children followed, but the flare kept them at a distance. Their whispers filled the tunnels around me. "You can't leave us alone again. Come back and play. We'll be so lonely." I knew these caves better than anyone, but somehow they knew them too. Every time I thought I'd lost them, they appeared ahead of me, trying to cut me off. They moved through cracks in the rock like water, flowing from chamber to chamber. My flare started to die. In the growing darkness, I heard them getting closer. Then I reached the main passage that led to the entrance. But standing in my way were all 12 children, holding hands in a line across the tunnel. "Please don't leave us," the little girl said. Her voice was different now, sadder, more desperate. "Everyone always leaves us alone in the dark." Behind me, the temperature dropped so fast that ice started forming on my jacket. My fingers were going numb. In a few more minutes, I'd be as helpless as the Hamilton family. That's when I had an idea. A desperate idea, but maybe the only chance. "I won't leave you alone," I said, "but I can't pee. Lay your games down here. If you want friends, you have to let me help you the right way." The children looked at each other, confused. "We can't leave," said the boy. "This is where we belong. This is where we died." "No," I said, pulling out my backup flashlight as the flare finally died. "This is where you got trapped, but you don't have to stay trapped forever." The little girl tilted her head, listening. "I know about the cave-in," I continued. "I know your parents looked for you. They never stopped looking, but they never found your bodies to bury them proper." "Mama?" the little girl whispered. "Your mama cried for you every day until she died," I said. It might have been true. It probably was true. All the parents did. They wanted to say goodbye, but they couldn't find you to do it right. The children's circle wavered. "I can help them find you," I said. "I can make sure you get buried proper with headstones and everything. Then your parents can visit you. Then you won't be alone." For a moment, the cold stopped getting worse. The children looked at each other, whispering in voices too low for me to hear. Then the little girl shook her head. "No, you're lying. You just want to leave us alone again. Everyone always leaves." The cold slammed back, worse than before. Ice crystals formed in the air. My flashlight flickered. And that's when the cave started to collapse. The rumbling started deep in the mountain, like an earthquake building strength. Dust rained from the ceiling, and I could hear rocks shifting in the passages behind me. "What's happening?" I yelled over the noise. The children looked scared now, their pale faces turned upward. "The cave remembers," the little girl said. "When we get angry, it remembers how we died." A chunk of limestone crashed down 20 feet behind me, blocking the passage. Then another. The children were losing control of WoW. Whatever power held them here, and the cave system was starting to fail just like it had in 1847. "Stop this," I shouted. "You'll kill us all." "We don't know how," the boy cried. It happens when we get scared." Water started pouring from cracks in the walls. Not the clean water from their supernatural pool, but muddy groundwater forced out by shifting rock. The tunnel floor turned into a stream, then a rushing torrent. I sloshed through knee-deep water toward the children. They backed away, but slowly, like they were fighting against their own fear. "Listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm while rocks crashed around us. "I've been doing cave rescue for 19 years. I've never lost anyone I could save. I won't lose you either, but you have to trust me." The little girl looked at me with those deep, dark eyes. "Promise you won't leave us alone?" "I promise. But first you have to let me save the Hamilton family. They have children too, just like you. Their parents are scared and looking for them, just like your parents looked for you." The water was up to my waist now, ice cold and rising fast. The children stood in it like it was nothing, but I could feel the hypothermia setting in. "We can't stop it," the little girl said. "Once it starts, it won't stop until the mountain falls down. Then we need to get out of here, all of us." I waded toward the side passage that led back to the pool chamber where the Hamilton family lay. The children followed, their forms flickering in and out of my flashlight beam. The chamber was flooding fast. The Hamiltons were unconscious but still breathing, barely. They'd been in the supernatural cold for hours. Without immediate medical attention, they'd die. "Help me get them out," I told the children. "We can't touch the living," said the boy. "Not safely. We make them too cold." The water reached my chest. In a few more minutes, we'd all drown. But I had rope, and I had training. I tied my climbing rope around Mr. Hamilton and started dragging him toward higher ground. The supernatural cold made my muscles seize up, but I kept going. One by one, I moved all 4 family members to a ledge above the flood line. The children watched, their forms getting fainter as the cave filled with water. "We're disappearing," the little girl said, her voice echoing strangely. "When the cave floods, we can't stay." "Good," I said, working to get the Hamilton kids breathing better. "That means you can finally rest." "But we'll be alone again." "No, you won't." I pulled out my waterproof notebook and pen. "I'm writing down exactly where you are in this cave system. When I get out, I'll make sure the right people know. Your bodies will be found and buried proper. Your family's graves are in the old cemetery outside town. I'll make sure you're buried with them." The little girl smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Not the creepy smile from before, but the real smile of a 7-year-old child. "You really promise?" "I promise on my ranger badge and my Cherokee grandmother's memory. You'll never be alone again." The children started to fade like morning mist. But as they disappeared, the cave stopped collapsing. The water stopped rising. "Thank you, Mr. Ranger," the little girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "Tell Mom and Papa we weren't scared at the end. Tell them we were just playing." Then they were gone. The cave fell silent except for dripping water and the shallow breathing of the Hamilton family. My flashlight flickered, running low on batteries, but the path to the entrance was clear. It took me 4 hours to get all 4 family members out of the cave. Mr. Hamilton regained consciousness halfway out and helped with his wife and kids. By the time we reached daylight, they were talking and asking what had happened. I told them they'd gotten lost and suffered from hypothermia. Nothing about children who'd been dead for 125 years. They remembered being cold and unfused, but the supernatural cold had affected their memories. They thought they'd just gotten lost in the dark. The rescue helicopter took them to the hospital in Lexington. All 4 made full recoveries, but I kept my promise. 6 months later, I stood in Copperhead Hollow Cemetery with a backhoe operator and 3 men from the Kentucky Historical Society. We'd found them exactly where I said they'd be. 12 small skeletons in a collapsed section of the old mine tunnels. The families were long dead, but descendants came from all over Kentucky for the burial service. Proper headstones, proper graves, names and dates carved in granite that would last forever. Sarah Elizabeth Morrison, age 7. Thomas Andrew Kirk, age 10. Mary Catherine Odell, age 6. All 12 names, all 12 children who'd died alone in the dark in November of 1847. Now they had families around them again. I retired from the Park Service the next year. 19 years was enough. These days, I run a small business teaching cave safety to spelunkers and tourists. I tell them about proper equipment, emergency procedures, and how easy it is to get lost in the dark. I don't tell them about the other mining sites throughout Appalachia, where similar accidents happened. I don't mention the reports I get sometimes from other rangers about children's laughter echoing from abandoned mine shafts, but I keep a list, names and locations, just in case. The Hamilton family sends me Christmas cards every year. The kids are grown now. Emma's a teacher. Jake's studying medicine. They don't remember much about their time in Copperhead Hollow, just that a park ranger saved them from getting lost in a cave. That's fine by me. Sometimes on quiet nights when the wind blows through the mountains just right, I think I can still hear children playing somewhere in the distance. But it sounds different now. Happy. Free. The cave system at Copperhead Hollow was permanently sealed after the rescue. Too dangerous, the state said. Risk of further collapse. The official report blamed unstable geology and cited the 1847 mining accident as evidence of ongoing structural problems. They were right about the danger, just not about the cause. If you're ever hiking in the Daniel Boone National Forest and you come across an old mining site, listen careful before you go exploring. If you hear children laughing where no children should be, turn around and walk away. Some games last longer than they should, and some children have been waiting a very long time for someone new to play with. But sometimes, if you're patient and kind and keep your promises, you can help them find their way home. The mountain remembers everything. It remembers the miners who dug too deep, the children who played where they shouldn't have, and the ranger who kept his word to kids who'd been waiting 125 years to hear someone say they mattered. I'm 62 now. When my time comes, I want to be buried in that little cemetery in Copperhead Hollow. Not because I'm afraid of what comes after, but because I made friends there, and friends shouldn't have to be alone. Even the ones who've been dead for over a century. Benjamin Stormcrow retired from the Kentucky State Park Service in 1973. He passed away in 1998 and was buried in Copperhead Hollow Cemetery, as requested in his will. Local hiking groups maintain the children's graves, and fresh flowers appear there regularly, though no one knows who brings them. The Copperhead Hollow cave system remains sealed.